There's something I've come to understand recently that changed the way I view Nintendo developed video games. While their competitors often enter a new console generation with brand new characters and ideas to better serve the advancements in technology they wish to showcase, Nintendo has always been able to rely on applying new ideas to their existing characters that have long since become worldwide icons. There's something about them that generates a level of fervent excitement no other publisher has been able to match. Maybe it's the extra layer of charm baked in, the long-established tenure of exciting and polished releases, or just the comfort that comes with the tradition of it all. For me, it's the promise of innovation by iteration. Instead of chasing trends like so many other publishers in this industry, Nintendo often takes huge risks to subvert expectations and become the trendsetter. But rather than quickly abandoning their old ideas in search of the next big thing, they most often reimagine them, indicating an innate desire to not just push more units, but tinker and refine until they're able to deliver the best product. The result of this process are all of the series that Nintendo's audience consistently shows up for. History dictates that for every new Nintendo console, there will always be a new Mario game, a new Legend of Zelda, Super Smash Bros., and Mario Kart, turning heads and topping sales charts. And over time, new characters and worlds defined by their revolutionary qualities and mass appeal have begun to join them. We've even reached a point where the next generation of Nintendo's developers who grew up playing Nintendo games are now redefining the future of the company with their own creations. As they continue to undergo this transition, Nintendo's recent successes have most likely set the foundation for years to come. But what about the games that weren't born during a period of overwhelming prosperity for Nintendo? I often find myself wondering what the status could be of the franchises and characters that are just as representative of that priceless Nintendo vision, yet have failed to reach the expectations set for them, or have simply fallen through the cracks of underperforming hardware. Look no further than what I believe to be one of Nintendo's most quietly underrated series. I know it, Nintendo knows it, and God knows Shigeru Miyamoto knows it. Pikmin might just be Nintendo's most unlucky franchise. Beginning its story on the GameCube, after Nintendo had already begun loosening the grip of its influence over the global home console market, it failed to reach the lofty expectations set for it. Through its genre-defying and ambitious design and scope, Pikmin was supposed to be for the GameCube what Super Mario Bros. Was for the Nintendo Entertainment System. A masterpiece redefining what video games could be, subsequently capturing the attention and adoration of players around the world. For one reason or another, the game failed to make as wide a splash as the developer was hoping for, but instead of falling over, it endured. Through what one can only imagine was unconditional confidence and belief in its potential, Pikmin outgrew itself as an ambitious experiment and became a fully fledged Nintendo franchise, periodically receiving additional chances to widen the appeal of the concept. And while they each have been well received, pushing the formula forward in unique and compelling ways while staying true to that initial vision, Pikmin still remains one of Nintendo's least popular properties. But soon, that could change. While Pikmin has indeed failed to scratch the same level of success many of its sibling series have achieved, what it has done over the years is consistently offer an experience one cannot find anywhere else, thus cultivating an incredibly dedicated and passionate fanbase that has been patiently awaiting its latest arrival. The thing that makes this story different from that of Star Fox or F-Zero is that the history is being written as we speak, which begs the question, wizawhat, why now? Why tell Pikmin's story with Pikmin 4 right around the corner? The truth is, I've already played every Pikmin game. I've been a fan from beginning to end when it first made me question how I could become so emotionally invested in a video game to when it reignited a passion for the medium I believed no longer existed. In an effort to get more people to understand why I love Pikmin and hopefully give it a chance for themselves, I learned as much of the history behind its development I could find, replayed each of its entries to solidify my opinions, and challenged myself to convey that passion. What I learned was that in spite of numerous unfortunate conditions setting it up for failure, or even the simple reality that it may just never be as widely appealing as other games, the history of Pikmin is a story of iteration, innovation, and following the passion just because. Beginning with just a simple idea in the simplest times, before sprouting, budding, and eventually blossoming into the beauty before our very eyes. One day since Impact. I've completed my latest replay of Pikmin and have begun conducting research for my big Pikmin retrospective. It's incredible how well this game holds up, and through a critical lens, I've come to understand why it's occupied a pedestal in my head all these years. All the childhood memories have come flooding back. All the curiosity, the joy, even the trauma. Researching the development history has added so much context to my own interpretations of the game's intent and themes. Nothing was an accident here, and the journey to this point is nothing short of a creative miracle. I have to share this with the world. Contrary to popular belief, the development of Pikmin did not begin after Shigeru Miyamoto had a breakthrough idea observing marching ants in his garden. The true origin point dates back to the latter half of the Nintendo 64's development cycle, as key figures began laying the foundations for what would arrive in the next console generation.
During the second half of game development for the Nintendo 64, we started to think about departing from the traditional concept of a game, and we tried to move toward a new concept of what a game could be. Based on that thinking, we started various projects. The Yoshi's Story and 1080 Snowboarding development teams are the foundation of the Pikmin development team. I asked them to create a completely new game that would be nothing like a sequel to Mario. That was the starting point.
Key among these figures were, of course, Miyamoto himself acting as producer, alongside a pair of directors from the aforementioned development teams. First, Shigefumi Hino, the Super Mario World character designer and original creator of Yoshi, who would later make his directorial debut with the esteemed Yoshi's Island before stepping back into a designer role for its Nintendo 64 follow-up, Yoshi's Story. Following was Masamichi Abe, who, unlike Hino, began his career at Namco designing and directing several of the original Tekken games before making his Nintendo debut with 1080 Snowboarding. With Hino focusing on the scenario and art direction, and Abe supervising the game design and programming, the duo, along with their team, set out to create something in adherence to Miyamoto's vision, something completely brand new. In order to make such a game, the technical advancements of Nintendo's next console were highly scrutinized. Chief among them were the GameCube's increased processing power and memory that allowed more objects to be simultaneously displayed on screen than ever before, each sporting their own set of artificial intelligence. This new capability thus became a point of focus for Miyamoto, steering the early phases of Pikmin's development.
When we were in the testing stages of the Nintendo GameCube, I requested one thing: to try to animate objects as much as possible. However, my people wanted to create a game in which you control 10 or 20 characters at once. There was a discrepancy between my idea and my people's idea. In my mind, I wanted to go off the image of the 100 Marios.
He's of course referring to the mythical Super Mario 128 technical demonstration first shown to the public at Nintendo's own Space World trade show in 2000. Video footage of the demo depicts a flat surface with a large 2D Mario sprite revealed to be housing 128 individual Marios, each getting into their own shenanigans dictated by the advanced AI, all before the terrain begins to contort, causing the Marios to be corralled closer together or even fall off the edge of the surface. While the terrain manipulation would later serve as inspiration for Super Mario Galaxy, the 128 Marios became the basis for Pikmin's development, the seed of a much grander idea. This seed eventually sprouted, not into a Pikmin's leaf, but into a prehistoric simulation beginning with just two characters, fittingly named Adam and Eve.
At the beginning, the idea was just to look at their life. I thought it was an interesting idea from a producer's point of view. Watch their life was the theme. Give them love or make them fight. Act like God. Depending on the player's decisions, they could make a nest and have children.
And while gradually increasing the community's population would later serve as a basis for the gameplay of the final product, trouble came when having to determine what the player's actual goal would be, leading to the team experimenting with several mechanics, such as collectively moving a group of characters using the GameCube's new C-Stick, or even picking up and throwing characters with the B button. Working with the AI was an ongoing goal, and the development of individual mechanics was progressing, but the project was still missing the glue that transformed a prototype into a fully fledged game players would want to come back to again and again. This was when the idea of marching ants prompted the original idea to bud into something much greater.
It's not that I came up with that watching ants, but during a time when we were trying to reorganize something we were already making, I thought this would be best if we made them as ants. While we were trying to come up with some kind of gameplay that would be fun, controlling lots of objects at once, it's natural to consider gameplay where they would all attack something together, or all voyage ahead together, or clear a goal together, but it's hard to decide on a proper objective. We kind of had a rough idea, but no matter who we asked, no one could come up with a clear goal. But if you watch ants, they return. They go home. The goal is their home, right? I figured if they're going to have a goal to go to, it's better to watch them go there themselves rather than having the player escort them. And we had made an adjustment so that they could follow each other, so it all came together into a proper game when we figured we could control a bunch of characters with this mechanic.
With this revelation, the team had finally found their gameplay hook, and as development continued to progress, every subsequent design choice seemed to coincide with the marching ants motif. While the original idea for Adam and Eve was to work within the natural world, the ants influenced the choices for both a world set in the forest, as well as the size of the Pikmin being just a few centimeters tall. The first designs were even black without any facial features, just like ants. But it wasn't long before they were given more distinct features along with vivid coloring in the plant-like design to tie them all together. And as more and more choices were made, the designers began to notice a connection brewing between the player and the Pikmin that would prove to have a profound impact on how the game would be perceived.
In the midst of production, we had come up with this idea to make it like ants. And just by happenstance, one of the designers who was making vegetables and plants had all these sketches. There was this one I loved. These characters with leaves and flowers on their heads, and they'd go to drink water with the flowers. I thought, this is great, and their eyes were dots, black dots, and they didn't have any facial expressions, so we made a demo, and when the camera went for a close-up, seeing all these creatures lined up with their dot eyes, this blank stare, not even really looking at the camera, I got this chill. I thought, what would happen if I let something happen to these innocent creatures?
This anecdote comes from an interview with Miyamoto conducted by film director and comedian Hitoshi Matsumoto, airing on Japanese television in 2011. While the interview is primarily focused on exploring Miyamoto's creative processes and his role as an auteur in the video game industry, Pikmin seems to always find its way back into the conversation. It's clear Matsumoto has a great fondness for Pikmin, because while the game itself is fun and charming on the surface, there's something much deeper to it, stemming from that connection. A narrator goes on to explain that while playing, Matsumoto found there to be an interesting mix of joy and sorrow, as in real life, an alarmingly accurate and succinct reflection of my own experiences with Pikmin. I still remember the very first time I saw it. In a time before the dominance of social media, ease of access to online video broadcasts, and influencer marketing, video game publishers were experimenting with different ways of informing the public about their upcoming games. Print and broadcast media were the go-tos, but in this case, I learned about Pikmin by means of a completely different game. Hidden at the bottom of the options menu in Luigi's Mansion lay a prompt to view a Pikmin movie. Keep in mind, I was an extremely timid child, and for much longer than I'd like to admit, was utterly terrified of Luigi's Mansion. My assumption was that this bonus movie would be just as scary, and when viewing it for the first time, I actually stopped the playback multiple times out of fear of more ghosts or monsters. My curiosity eventually got the better of my fear, allowing me to view the rest of the movie. And I was shocked to find out what I was viewing was the tonal opposite of Luigi's mansion. It was both beautiful and strange. I didn't quite understand what I was looking at until this shot of the Pikmin carrying several dwarf bulborbs back to the onions while the player character stood by with a small squad of lieutenants while another disorganized and neglected squad was busy being consumed by a bulborb in the background. I became obsessed with this scene, playing the movie back over and over again just to get another view of it. And in this moment, over 20 years after the fact, I realized that what both Matsumoto and Miyamoto saw in it was true, and it had a stranglehold over my fascination. Every key aspect of Pikmin is conveyed in this shot, both the joy and the sorrow, as the Pikmin experience both the beginning and the end of their life cycle, while just a few stand idly by in adoration of their captain. Seeing the Pikmin act on their own, specifically behaving in this ant-like manner with their own agency, joy, and anguish resonated with me in a way I didn't yet have the faculty to understand, leaving an imprint on my memory. Needless to say, I did what all children would do in such a situation. I begged my parents for the game, and shortly after its release, dove into the spitting image of Miyamoto's future for Nintendo. A wholly new and breathtaking, yet oddly familiar world. In classic Nintendo fashion, Pikmin wastes no time introducing the main scenario before handing over control to the player. On a journey deep through outer space, Captain Olimar of the planet Hakatate finds his spaceship suddenly struck by a meteor, jettisoning the craft into orbit of a nearby foreign planet before making a crash landing, leaving him incapacitated and stranded on the planet's surface. Olimar awakens to find his ship, the SS Dolphin, in a state of complete disrepair before discovering the Pikmin, a group of curious, plant-like creatures that instinctively obey his commands in order to propagate their species. After observing them work together to increase their population and retrieve the dolphin's missing engine, Olimar hatches a plan to utilize the Pikmin to gather the remaining missing parts of his ship scattered across the surface of the planet during the crash in order to escape and return home. The only catch is, he only has 29 more days to do so, as after day 30, his spacesuit's life support system will cease functioning, exposing him to the atmosphere's high volume of oxygen, a substance that is highly toxic to Hakatatians. So here's the gameplay pitch. With just 30 days to complete Olimar's task, each lasting just over 13 minutes, the player must use the Pikmin to locate and retrieve each of his 30 ship parts in 5 unique zones, each housing their own obstacles, hazards, and enemies to overcome. Much like Nintendo's previous games, you primarily control a single character from a third-person perspective. But instead of using said character to perform various actions on the basis of platforming or combat, you instead command an army of up to 100 small creatures to complete those actions for you, each following a pattern of intelligent behaviors to interact with the environment using as few complex commands as necessary. With the A button, you can pluck Pikmin out of the ground, throw them, and interact with certain objects. With the B button, you simply blow a whistle to call any Pikmin within its vicinity back to the active squad, interrupting any ongoing task. The X button disbands the squad into smaller groups sorted by color. The C stick directs the active squad's movement relative to the captain's position while issuing basic orders. And the rest of the buttons are used to manipulate the camera or access menus. For a brand new concept, it's a fairly simple control scheme. Pikmin is often compared to games within the real-time strategy genre, and when examining the nature of the game as well as its Adam and Eve roots, it's easy to see why. Real-time strategy games are most often played from a godlike, omniscient perspective, assigning orders to units much like the rumored Adam and Eve prototype. With conquest so often being the goal, you set formations for combat units, often utilizing a multitude of squads to attack from different angles in accordance with their specializations, as well as responding to threats on your own base simultaneously, all while managing an array of non-combat units to accumulate resources and build structures. It becomes a lot to manage fairly quickly. requiring a method of input that excels at precisely selecting and grouping units while darting from one corner of a large map to the other at a moment's notice to be controlled effectively, which is why these games are most often played on the PC with a mouse and keyboard. The GameCube's controller isn't quite that. Instead, an iteration of the previous generations that sent the company headfirst into a new frontier, the 3D action-adventure game. After much trial and error involving the aforementioned experiments with the C-stick and throwing of Pikmin, a choice was thus made to embrace the GameCube's limitations rather than fight against them, culminating in a single change that would send a ripple effect across the entire project. A line in the sand was drawn between the strategy games of old and this new action-adventure with a final coat of strategy by shifting the perspective from the omniscient to one that simply follows a single character. At the design level, the shift allowed these action elements to be fully implemented to keep the controls simple and intuitive for players that were already speaking the language of Nintendo's game design, while also offering them a rich sense of mechanical feedback. Rather than just commanding a group of Pikmin to recklessly rush a pellet posy with 2 clicks, with a bit of precision, the player can instead aim and toss a Pikmin to the top of its stem to deliver a single deadly blow, rewarding mastery of the throwing mechanic. In the midst of combat, players can not only swarm enemies with a C-stick, they can also quickly move the Pikmin out of harm's way. I mentioned previously that while experimenting with these mechanics, throwing was originally mapped to the B button. Well, this was obviously changed in the final build because the development team recognized it's simply more fun to mash a bigger button in rapid succession. And by swapping mappings with the whistle, the final control scheme correlates more closely with the universal meaning of each button's corresponding color. Red meaning stop, and green, go. And while these are all great and engaging design choices, they alone do not solve the biggest issue a game like this should fall victim to, the precision targeting itself. Just as, if not exceedingly more brilliant, is the solution to such a problem, making this all work without prompting players to ever notice or think about. While the camera perspective is indeed locked in on Olimar, you don't actually control him with the analog stick. What you do control is the throwing reticle that Olimar only begins following as it reaches the furthest extent of his throwing range. It's doing the job of 2 analog sticks at once. This does open up Olimar to being stuck in an unfavorable position for a split second longer than you may want him to be, but because the C-stick offers additional control over the Pikmin, it's hardly ever a problem as both sticks may be used in tandem for the best results. It's not perfect, but it's really as elegant a solution one could ever find working within the limitations of the GameCube's controller, a strategic solution to an action-based problem. All of these design choices act as the foundation for allowing the game's strategic elements to remain both simple and fun. It's kind of the classic Paper Mario effect, where the stat and equipment variables players can adjust to maximize their effectiveness in combat are much simpler in Paper Mario than other RPGs. The game's various action commands introduce an extra element of skill expression that arguably make battles feel more engaging than other systems twice as complex. Pikmin was handled much the same way, as the micro decisions players make with respect to its action elements supplement the tightened scope of strategic choices the player must make at any particular moment due to the limited perspective. Because Captain Olimar can only be in one place at a time, playing Pikmin is less about directly managing several different squads of units at once, and more about employing careful planning to be able to better focus on what is directly in front of him. And this works to the benefit of both the player and the GameCube's hardware, as the game only needs to render what is currently on the screen to the fullest extent. The big strategic decisions players do make involve deciding where to head next with their active squad while evaluating whether or not a smaller group can safely complete a task on their own. And this unsurprisingly makes for an enriching and immersive single-player experience. There's a lot of exploration here, especially on a first playthrough. And while the level design opens up more and more the further one progresses, the game's 3 biggest zones still carefully employ the use of general level geometry, hazards and obstacles, and ship parts acting as a sort of breadcrumb trail to shepherd the player forward while still providing enough freedom to maximize efficiency or make mistakes. Enemies and destructible gates are the most common roadblock, as players need to decide whether to engage immediately or return more prepared after heading in a different direction. Each of the 3 Pikmin types uncovered at various points of the game also have their own mostly passive abilities required to solve problems that often impact daily planning. Red Pikmin are the strongest fighters, sporting a 1.5 times increase in attack power compared to the other types, as well as a resistance to fire, which is only encountered sparingly throughout the game, yet incredibly devastating if underestimated. That doesn't mean yellow Pikmin can't hold their own in combat. In fact, their ability to be thrown higher than the others makes them the ideal choice for grounding airborne enemies, and their use of bomb rocks is essential for demolishing reinforced walls and bursting down tougher enemies without greater risk of loss. Blue Pikmin aren't as flashy as the others, but they are the only type that can safely access the most commonly found hazard in the game, water. Bodies of water are often the final barrier between the swift retrieval of a ship part or a halt in progress one must better prepare for later, making blues a dependable addition to any squad. As players gradually clear more obstacles and enemies, more and more of the coveted ship parts begin to present themselves. And this is where the Pikmin's ant-like behavior is showcased to full effect, as the AI allows them to not just simply find their own way back to the dolphin, but also seek the fastest route possible, even responding to changes in level structure made by the player. Their pathfinding, however, doesn't acknowledge the presence of enemies, requiring players to make a choice between clearing a safe path in advance or distracting enemies themselves as the Pikmin manage to slip by, adding several dimensions of challenge to the retrieval process. Pikmin's gameplay loop displays its most impressive qualities when all of these factors are simultaneously considered to take calculated risks. It feels incredible to end a day with multiple ship parts in tow by employing careful planning, mastery of the mechanics, and elegant usage of multitasking. Players who enjoy seeking their own challenges will naturally come to rely on these strategies, but for those who are a little more extrinsically motivated, there is of course an additional factor, rewarding or rather laying on the pressure to make these decisions with a sense of urgency, because the only resource more valuable to Captain Olimar than a strong and diverse Pikmin population is time. And as we all know, time is forever dwindling. Time as a resource is really the essence of Pikmin on so many levels, which brings us exactly back to where we began. Unlike most of Nintendo's games released by this point, in Pikmin, failure isn't an option. It's the end of the game. At the end of the 30 days, if the required amount of ship parts have not been collected, Olimar attempts to escape the Pikmin planet's atmosphere before crashing down right where he started with no more life support to sustain him, resulting in a bad ending. The threat of such an outcome drives players to engage with each of its systems with the greatest efficiency possible. It dictates every decision players make, from impacting part retrieval plans to even the choices one makes in the thick of combat. Carelessly tossing away Pikmin not only diminishes that resource, it means they must dedicate more time to replenishing and nurturing them. One might choose to spend their first day in a new area scouting out part locations and hazards on their own without the fear of losing Pikmin, but there's a consequence to that choice, with more precious time being lost. The decision to pair the 30-day time limit with exactly 30 ship parts to collect was brilliant, because it gives players a clear metric to weigh against the creeping sense of tension and uncertainty. As long as you retrieve one part every single day, you can rest each night a little easier. But as the difficulty naturally ramps up, players may find themselves falling behind, relying on any extra breathing room acquired in the early days. Completing Pikmin is no easy task, as I was only able to achieve my first completion with just 3 days remaining, and I was on the edge of my seat until the very last. This overall looming tension is then concentrated into numerous hair-splitting moments by the daily time limit, because the difference between squeezing out that final part by sunset or failing to do so can prove to be devastating, resulting in having to dedicate an entire extra day to a menial task. So much of Pikmin's challenge revolves around the time limit. Many of the game's enemies have easily exploitable behaviors that, once understood, reduces their threat significantly. The Bulborb, for instance, can be swarmed for a quick kill with just the right volume of Pikmin. The level of threat directly correlates with the amount of Pikmin at one's current disposal. So what happens when players enter a situation where they don't have enough Pikmin to cleanly secure a kill that is the difference between securing a ship part or serving up a tasty snack? There's nothing stopping players from returning to the Onion to bolster their forces, or waiting for another squad to finish their task before taking on the Bulborb, that is, except for time. Instead, they'll most often take a risk, engaging the target less safely at the risk of trading Pikmin for more time. It always comes back to time because time is the one thing you can never have back. Much of Pikmin's core design facilitates a play experience that is both fun and challenging. The marriage of action and strategy under such a strangely intuitive control scheme makes for an innovative addition to Nintendo's portfolio of experiments that challenge conventions while embracing limitations. It is everything their development teams strive to achieve in a nutshell, but the framework of play is actually just one side of the coin that is Pikmin. One need only examine the player's relationship with the passage of time to catch a glimpse of the other side. The 30-day time limit is perhaps the most contentious design choice, not just pertinent to this original game, but the Pikmin series as a whole, as future games would later revise this aspect of the formula, largely in response to player feedback. The goal was to offer a unique experience that recontextualizes failure in order to encourage players to replay the game's story several times in pursuit of mastery.
I wanted to give the game a definite size that people could play and replay many times. In the beginning, we thought we should make it last 40 or 60 days, but players wouldn't want to try playing the game again if it was too long. I think this game will become more interesting upon the third or fourth play. People have taken many tries to finish the first stage of Mario. During the process, I don't think the player starts to dislike the game. I think players enjoy finding out they're eventually doing better and making more progress each time through. I think that feeling is a very important element of gameplay.
Receiving a similar response to The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, a sizable subset of players, certainly enough for Nintendo to take notice, related the pressures of passing time to feelings of distress and anxiety rather than motivation and determination, ultimately causing them to put down the game. And to be perfectly honest, when I first played Pikmin over 20 years ago, I felt much the same way. While I was able to achieve my first completion in 27 days, that is only partially the truth. My real history with Pikmin is defined by repeatedly starting and stopping playthroughs after reaching a series of all different kinds of setbacks that distressed me in a way other games didn't. Which begs the question, is that a failure of the design? I'd argue no, because these choices were purposefully made to instill tension. Per Miyamoto's own words, to be nothing like a sequel to Mario, and to depart from the traditional concept of a game and move towards a new concept of what a game could be. And that is exactly what they did, after looking upon the characters they created and realizing that layered atop all of this innovative, intriguing video game design, must there be a world that encapsulates both the joys and sorrows of life itself. Pikmin at its core is oddly about so much more than the gameplay it wishes to serve or the major elements of the plot. And this really begins with the depiction of Captain Olimar as a character. Olimar certainly serves his role as a player avatar well, but he does so in a way that is unconventional compared to other Nintendo series protagonists. He doesn't have any spoken dialogue because he's the only character here. And because the game is played from such a distant perspective, he isn't animated with the level of detail other series protagonists received on the GameCube, leaving really only one option to develop his character: written monologues. What likely first began as simply a more creative and immersive way of explaining the game's controls and the player's goal became so much more by the end of development, as the strength of the writing is in its depiction of an exceedingly intelligent and inquisitive character, thoughtful in his observations, while approaching each of his discoveries with the same sense of urgency expected from the player given the situation he's found himself in. And some of the best writing, composed of both discovery and reflection, is found in the voyage log, updated at the end of every day. The entire log is composed of almost 70 entries, more than double the amount players can naturally uncover in a single playthrough. And the manner in which these entries are received depends on the player's actions and pace of play. Discoveries of new Pikmin types, additional mechanics, and new areas naturally take precedent, followed by observations of enemy behaviors and how best to deal with them. But when Olimar finds nothing else of note to write about, he begins writing some of my favorite entries, wrestling with the morality of his decisions and reminiscing about his family and friends back on Hecate. One entry reads, "My people were born out of the sea of stars to come down to Hecate, and when we complete our lives, we return to the great ocean of stars. But since these Pikmin come from the depths of the soil, surely to the soil they shall return." How very poetic. While it is all still alien to me, the basic premise is universally beautiful. This is just a taste of how thoughtful and poignantly written these entries were, and to think that just as they are in-game, according to Hino and Miyamoto, the vast majority of the original text was written as an extra night job by just a single writer, Motoi Okamoto, a programmer who had only joined the company 2 years before the game's release. By the end of development, these writings had far outshined their original purpose, endearing players to not just Olimar, but all of the creatures he encounters on the foreign planet he inhabits. It's as if the world were a character all its own, and no clearer is this explored than through the trials and tribulations of the Pikmin themselves. Even with such simple designs, the Pikmin are able to express a personality all their own. They stare intently at Olimar, awaiting orders when under his command, but immediately begin to loaf around in their idle state. They get restless too when they feel they aren't contributing, and even break orders when passing by clusters of tall grass or crystals, piquing their instinctual curiosity in search of nectar. The Pikmin shout with joy when tossed, celebrate after securing a lost ship part, and even express their hard-working cooperative nature when dragging their spoils back to the onions one step at a time. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's all very wholesome and inspiring, but most importantly, it allows the Pikmin to become much more than a dispensable unit type, another piece on the chessboard. In an effort to make the game feel more real, the Pikmin truly feel alive.
Current Pikmin are created in great detail. Each one looks at its surroundings and acts differently depending on the situation. I wanted the player to feel that each Pikmin has its own will. There is a program that accounts for that. The game will feel more real to you if there are some Pikmin that listen to you, and some that don't.
And while many games employ such tactics to make simple characters more appealing, in Pikmin, all of this joy is juxtaposed by the sudden and unpredictable terrors that appear when the Pikmin are inevitably placed in harm's way. While the end of each day marks an opportunity to squeeze as much efficiency out of the Pikmin as possible for the benefit of both Olimar and the player, it doesn't come without the risk of subjecting lost Pikmin to the cruelty of the planet's nocturnal creatures. Once you've doomed even a single Pikmin to such a fate, you'll never want to repeat it, leading to desperate scrambles to recover every last creature before the clock ticks 0. Instances like these are littered all over this game, leading to unforgettable memories that could be more appropriately labeled as trauma. The very first time I touched down in the Forest of Hope, when I was 6 years old, after surveying the surrounding area and dispatching some enemies, the nearby pond captured my interest. With a squad of about 80 Pikmin, and without hesitation, I ignorantly led the entire team into the water and straight to their demise. Paralyzed with fear, I was unable to act and just sat there with my jaw agape, watching my entire squad helplessly drown. And as 80 innocent creatures let out their last cry all at once as their souls vanished from their bodies, the only way I could cope with such a heartbreaking disaster was to reset the game and walk away. As a child, your brain is not yet equipped to understand the magnitude of loss, how precious life is. I used to go outside and root out the rocks in our garden to see the slugs wriggle and squish ants, watching as the marching line responded with a distress-fueled frenzy. But in Pikmin, because the very same creatures were personified and brought up to scale with a character whose own curiosity I could relate to, the loss of life took on a whole new meaning. As an adult, as recently as my latest playthrough, I frequently found myself still having to fight the urge to reset my mistakes away, trying to refute the uncomfortable realization of Pikmin mortality. And as my nature as a player has evolved to seek and overcome challenge, an ongoing conflict between trying to clear the game as fast as possible and preserving every last Pikmin life rages within me as I play. Another log entry reads, "No matter how many of their compatriots fall in battle, the Pikmin fight on. Would this have been a peaceful planet had I never come? No. Surely the Pikmin lived like this before my arrival. They must have. In any case, I must not waver if I hope to return home. My task now is to do whatever I can to recover all of the dolphin's missing parts."
I thought it would be great if the completionist goal for the best players was to beat the game without allowing a single one to die, to be that connected to them. With one look, you feel for them. And it's incredibly rare that one of my own creations moves me like that, makes me laugh in spite of myself. So that was a really happy thing for me. And it occurred to me, there's never been a game before that invokes that feeling. But in terms of how to explain it, I thought ants would be understandable. That's the origin. Pikmin is the kind of game that measures your morals, and people can be unfair or hypocritical. I think everyone has that in some capacity. There's no one that is completely natural, that is completely good, and this game measures that, so as the creators, we question ourselves, is it okay to make something like this? The rest of it is just a game, so if it's invoked that kind of feeling in people just a little, then it's fulfilled its purpose, and if the rest is fun, I just kinda let it go. But it's kinda scary.
Make no mistake, under the charming and whimsical exterior, Pikmin's intent was to unearth these feelings about life and death, to present this moral quandary, and while losing Pikmin to natural hazards like water, fire, or exploding your entire squad with a carelessly placed bomb rock are often the most visceral reminders of nature's cruelty, no struggle could be more intriguing than the conflict between nature's most beautiful creations. For the Pikmin's low stature on the food chain leaves them stuck in an eternal conflict with this planet's most formidable foes. What's immediately so captivating about Pikmin's creatures is their proximity to life forms found on our own planet. This starts out tame enough with creatures resembling maggots, beetles, and clams. But as you progress further up the chain, the Pikmin ecosystem becomes so much more complex, with evolutionary lines of the same base creature sporting adaptations and physical features to better suit their environment. And what's so genius about this is the fact that the game tactfully uses in-universe reasons delivered through Olimar's log to explain enemy behavior that is intuitively modeled after real-world examples. For instance, larger creatures are often explained to be both territorial and nocturnal, allowing them to be placed where they will provide the appropriate level of challenge and tension, with smaller variations clustered around for protection. Even creatures that aren't nocturnal and don't eat Pikmin, like the Wollywog, are explained to patrol the water's edge in order to protect their eggs laid on low-hanging tree branches from both blue Pikmin and water dumples. The attention to detail is staggering, with real-world examples acting as the obvious base of inspiration. But in order to make the world feel realistic while still feeling foreign enough to the outside observer, the designers pushed further as links to the real world dissipate and the designs dip deeper into the straight-up unsettling category. There's perhaps none more disturbing than the smoky prog, an extremely rare creature that has reached infamy among the Pikmin fanbase for its striking design, bizarre set of behaviors, and sheer force of will. For one, the smoky prog is unique in the fact that it is the only area-specific boss that can be entirely skipped over. Its ominous, towering egg can only be found in the distant spring on or before day 15. And for those that do manage to reach it in time, the first encounter is most likely an anticlimactic one. But for those that naively pay it no mind, the consequences can be disastrous. On my latest playthrough, I was, admittedly, the naive type. I curiously approached the egg without any semblance of a plan while my squad was busy assembling a nearby bridge. And in my haste, I left the area just before it could hatch. Upon my return to base camp, I was met with a foreboding sight. The Smoky Prog is an optional boss in the sense that killing it yields no reward required to complete the game. But in the event you've unfortunately allowed it to hatch, it's going to throw a wrench into all of your plans until you decide to deal with it, as it behaves like no other creature in the game. Instead of aggressing onto your Pikmin, upon hatching, it heads straight for one of the 3 onions, and if no Pikmin sprouts are within the area for it to unearth with its fervent cry, it simply waits for your move. Its chemtrail is highly toxic, killing any and all Pikmin in an instant, and its positioning directly beneath the onion makes it a pain to deal any sort of damage. It is a brutal boss to deal with, but the true horror is found in the subtlety of its design, how it subverts expectations by lacking any outward aggression unless provoked. In the Pikmin world, much like our own, most creatures react aggressively to territorial threats, typically out of necessity for survival, but not the Smoky Prog. It doesn't protect its territory. It doesn't eat Pikmin to survive. Instead, it chooses chaos while just standing there with no other expression than a piercing, unwavering gaze belonging to only a creature that couldn't possibly naturally belong to this world. While many of Pikmin's creatures make some sort of sense by following the existing rules of nature, encountering the more outlandish creatures like the Mamuta, Gulix, or Smoky Prog puts you closer into Olimar's shoes as you both try to reason with its existence. That's at least how I felt as a child, looking around my environment, trying to imagine where I could place these creatures in my own world. It's fascinating. In the end, by being astute in his observations, open to the possibilities, and overcoming all odds, Captain Olimar and the Pikmin managed to gather up the last of his missing ship parts, allowing him to return home. And after reflecting on this rattling excursion every night for upwards of 30 days as the Pikmin follow him to every potential corner of the planet, there is something of a melancholic sense to the air. As Olimar gives his final goodbye, his team follows him into low orbit of the planet for the last time, along with several never-before-seen onion varieties, presumably leaving just enough room for a potential sequel. In a strange way, I can't help but feel that this game's story is a reflection of the project's development, with such an ambitious goal ahead of them and no vision other than a vague idea of what might make for a fun, never-before-seen game. The development team struggled through trial and error phases before taking a step back, assessing what they had, and leaning fully into what set it apart from other games to create something truly unlike anything else of its time. Something captivating, thoughtful, and poignant. In an interview with game developer, formerly known as Gamasutra, Motoi Okamoto, Pikmin's lone credited scriptwriter, gave some insight into how the game came together that I believe explains why its fans hold it in such high regard to this very day in a far more succinct manner than my own. He states,
"When developing Pikmin, Miyamoto said the next Mario is Pikmin. And when he was developing Pikmin, Miyamoto faced 2 problems. First, should his studio make games that felt like movies or included pre-rendered movie scenes? Second, how to deal with the phenomenon of interactive art. As he's mentioned in many interviews, Miyamoto has long been interested in interactive play and creation tools, not just pure video games. When game consoles like PlayStation and Nintendo 64 introduced 3D visuals, he considered that perhaps these consoles could introduce fun, interactive art that players could continue to touch and play without a clear goal or creative tools. From that point of view, Pikmin reminds me of those interactive art environment games. But the game design god Miyamoto introduced classic game mechanics into it. I think that's his long-standing conflict. He has the large responsibility of making killer titles that sell consoles. And of course, he is a great magician with plenty of techniques to build classic game mechanics and tight gameplay. But he also wants to create open-ended play. I understand what Miyamoto meant when he said the next Mario is Pikmin. Pikmin was his launch title for GameCube, and is now seen as one of his masterpieces. He'd created a great game with Mario, and was trying again to create the next big thing in games.
Thus concludes this chapter. With the goal of producing the next Mario, Pikmin finally blossomed and was thrust into the world with the hope of not only selling GameCubes, but to continue pushing the medium forward. However, a single title alone would not be enough to begin establishing a legacy remotely comparable to Mario. And by constructing such an intriguing world with so much additional potential shortly after release, discussions began to brew regarding the possibility of jumping straight into the next entry, resulting in a reinterpretation of the concept with the same energy only some of Nintendo's strangest sequels could match. 5 days since Impact. With the original Pikmin behind me, the time has come to revisit its sequel for the first time in over a decade. I remember this game being exceptionally weird, but not this weird. As it turns out, Pikmin 2 provides the perfect opportunity to discuss both the unique opportunities and exceptional challenges of developing a sequel under the same set of restrictions. As such, I think I'll approach it from this angle. I just hope the Pikmin 2 fans don't get too upset. With Miyamoto's eyes set upon transitioning Pikmin from a standalone experiment into Nintendo's next mega franchise, after the original's completion, he entrusted the team with immediately jumping into the development of its sequel, challenging them to complete it in a single year.
Right after the previous work was finished, Miyamoto told me, make 2 in 1 year. After going to great lengths to create it, we were told to release a sequel while it still had momentum.
Likely operating off of the same mentality that oversaw the production of not just one, but several sequels to key works releasing all under the umbrella of a single hardware generation, Miyamoto held enough faith in the team to believe they could rapidly deliver a sequel by utilizing many of the same assets and tools they had already created for the original Pikmin. The problem was that Miyamoto himself, this time busy with other projects, was more distant from Pikmin 2's development than he had been with the original, tasking Takashi Tezuka to assist him with the supervision while leaving much of the decision-making to his pair of directors that had their own plans for the franchise. As feedback regarding the original title began rolling in, both Hino and Abe agreed that implementing ideas they were unable to include in the original game while greatly reforming the design in response to fan feedback would be the best approach for developing a sequel. And while many fans responded positively to such changes, the development process, much like its former, was anything but smooth, resulting in a series of revisions and delays.
The development period ended up being about 2.5 years. When I had the producers play the first version, there were a lot of things that needed to be revised, because the opinion of the producer is very important. Originally, it was supposed to be sold in the fall of 2003, but we decided to review it a little more and make some adjustments, so it was delayed by half a year.
Sequel development is a pretty interesting facet of Nintendo's software delivery strategy, because as time goes on, it's become much more common to see Nintendo's hit franchises receive just one key entry per hardware generation, choosing to reimagine core concepts under a new set of capabilities and restrictions. And I have to imagine this is because throughout Nintendo's history, sequels released under the same hardware rarely come close to fully recapturing the original game's audience, while becoming more and more difficult to develop over time. As early as the Nintendo 64, one of Nintendo's key studios was already feeling the pressure of having to meet Miyamoto's demand of turning around a game's development in a single year. That being The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Eiji Aonuma has since expressed the problems he faced during this game's tumultuous development, from pulling Yoshiaki Koizumi away from his own project for help, resulting in its cancellation, to repeatedly working into the late hours of the night, even pulling an all-nighter he soberingly remembers to this day. seemingly from beginning to end, the development of Majora's Mask was a scramble to balance the duo's ambitious design goals with having to meet the deadline. The team was even working so hard that Miyamoto unexpectedly decided to retract his original demand, only for Aonuma to reassure him that Majora's Mask would be completed on schedule. And while it only ended up moving a fraction of Ocarina of Time's total units sold, it's undeniable that the restrictions played a large role in it becoming a cult classic. There simply isn't another game in the series that feels quite like Majora's Mask. And that's because working within an existing framework forced them to think far outside of the box to keep the game feeling fresh while still maintaining that Nintendo difference of creativity and polish. With Pikmin 2's development receiving such similar restrictions, I can't help but feel reminded of Majora's Mask, explaining why the final product looks and plays like Pikmin while simultaneously feeling like such a strong departure from the essence of the original game. The key difference is that where Majora's Mask set out to differentiate itself from a generational title that received near unanimous praise, Pikmin 2 had to decide whether to continue evolving its established identity or move in a slightly different direction by addressing its predecessor's key area of frustration. It's difficult to say whether or not the Pikmin team's leadership viewed the restrictions of the previous game's 30-day time limit as a weakness of the design in both hindsight and Miyamoto's absence. But what is certain is that its removal was considered from the very beginning of its sequel's development in order to diversify the two. And as criticisms and concerns regarding the original's length began to reach the team, the most attractive choice became more or less obvious.
With the original Pikmin, our focus was on getting the player to try to escape from the planet within this limited time frame. The player was really challenged to try and work through the game within that 30-day time limit. This time, what we intended to do from the very beginning was to create a game that would allow players the greater freedom to explore the world at their leisure, and take the amount of time that they want to get to know the world a little better. So that was our main focus and our main reason for removing the 30-day time limit. And we do listen to user feedback and look at ways to incorporate that in creating new experiences for the user. So on that side of things, we did take some of that feedback into consideration as well.
One of the points that we want to stress most about Pikmin 2 is the fact that we have removed the 30-day time limit. In the original game, we really wanted to create a challenge for players to strategize their way around the problems and puzzles within the time frame. Whereas this time around, we really want people to be able to play the game the way they want, take the time they want, and really sit back and enjoy the world of Pikmin to their heart's content. So, I hope people will be looking forward to that.
Given the love and attention to detail that was poured into the world of Pikmin after seeing its personality and believability have such an immense impact on its own developers, I think the desire to allow players to spend more time within it was a reasonable one. But because the 30-day time limit was such a vital component of the original's DNA, removing it meant its sequel would have to receive sweeping changes to both its structure and tone. The result is a product with an ambitious scope of features given the development timeline, while feeling a little less cohesive overall with a frankly absurd new premise to match. Pikmin 2 begins immediately following the events of the original, beginning with Captain Olimar finally touching back down on his home planet of Hecate. But where he likely expected a warm welcome from family and friends, he's instead greeted by a disconcerting announcement that his employer, Hecate Freight, has taken on a crippling debt of up to 10,000 Hecatatian Pocos in his absence to recover the losses of a botched delivery committed by the company's newest hire, Louis. In complete shock, Olimar drops a memento of his time spent on the Pikmin planet, which is suddenly beamed up by Hecate Freight's only remaining company asset, a rundown ship sporting the ability to appraise an object's value. The souvenir meant only to be a gift for Olimar's son is revealed to be worth 100 Pocos, a shockingly sizable portion of the company's debt. And as Olimar explains, there are many such treasures remaining on the Pikmin planet. He's immediately sent back to recover the company's debt without so much as an opportunity to give his family a hello and goodbye, his incompetent subordinate in tow. The approach is frankly quite shocking following the heartfelt goodbye that was Pikmin's conclusion. And there is a sick irony in seeing the SS Dolphin touch down on the surface of Hagatate after such a formative experience, just moments before being shipped off to begin repaying the debt. But it sets the tone for this new Pikmin game immediately. Throw out what you think you know about Pikmin, as this game spares no expense to completely refresh the concept. With survival no longer being the goal and no time constraints to abide by, the stakes for Pikmin 2 shifted massively in swapping ship parts with a much wider assortment of treasures that are often based off of real-world branded products. Not only does the player have as much time as they need to complete the objective, they're also given a wider degree of flexibility to approach the mission with, as there are actually 201 pieces to collect, with the majority of them available before the post-game area. And I think this points to a desire to introduce a more malleable level of difficulty than the previous entry. There certainly were a few optional ship parts the player could get away with not retrieving in the original, but this was only ever clearly indicated after completing the game, making an escape without them more likely a happy accident than a deliberate choice. There's also just more to do in Pikmin 2, allowing players to better prepare themselves for the toughest challenges ahead. Additional resources, such as the spicy and bitter sprays, have been added that power up the Pikmin to unprecedented levels and lock down enemies for a safe kill, respectively. These tools prove to be indispensable, and with unlimited time on the player's hand, there's nothing stopping them from farming up a healthy supply while replenishing their Pikmin forces with reinforcements and nectar. As expected, with such a rapidly delivered sequel, much of the rest of Pikmin's core gameplay loop has been largely preserved to further cultivate a series' identity. Olimar is still plucking Pikmin, overcoming obstacles and enemies, and retrieving the spoils to secure mission objectives and continue propagating the Pikmin species. As a player, it still feels amazing to retrieve multiple treasures in a single day, and it is just as heartbreaking to watch the Pikmin perish as it ever was. But it all arguably feels much better to control, and that's because, in addition to sprays, what has changed are the tools players are given to carry out such tasks, beginning with a few key quality of life changes working in tandem to make the original game feel immediately dated by comparison, none of which is more obviously present than the additional captain himself. What began as simply a byproduct of the desire to introduce a multiplayer component to the sequel eventually became a series staple and another opportunity for players to further express their mastery of the strategy in the single player. Beyond simply allowing the team to pluck Pikmin faster, Louie's presence allows the player to essentially be in two different locations at once, expanding the possibilities for puzzle solving and multitasking. It definitely isn't as sophisticated as what would come later, but there's plenty of opportunities to get value out of the system that the previous game could not afford. More often than not, I ended up using one of the two captains to supervise a task while I was off seeking another, reducing both the amount of downtime and backtracking that was a consequence of having to manage several squads of Pikmin with a single character. Better yet, one of my favorite applications of Louie was to use him to gain knowledge regarding the level's obstacles and treasure locations to better prepare myself while further reducing needless backtracking. Make no mistake, I do believe having to juggle multiple tasks with Olimar alone is a critical aspect of what makes the original game so enticing to play and subsequently master. But in the absence of such time constraints with the sequel, giving the player more tools to explore the possibilities for strategy are certainly welcome. And in a sense, it feels as if the team's approach was to reduce tedium across the board. In Pikmin, additional controls for separating types in the midst of combat were interestingly omitted under the fear that too many options would end up bloating the system, becoming too complex for the average player to understand. And this led to a one-button solution that, while getting the job done, lacked the fluidity and precision of more modern equivalents. The Pikmin separate by color when the A button is held, but rather than being able to precisely select which group to begin throwing next, Olimar will instead automatically grab and throw whichever type is the closest to him. And this actually creates two additional problems. it isn't particularly clear which Pikmin Olimar will grab at any given point. And because the throwing mechanism operates by proximity to allow some control, the speed at which players can consecutively throw Pikmin is limited not by their mashing speed, but by the AI's own ability to respond to the action. In Pikmin 2, the groups still organize themselves when the A button is held, but the particular type prepped for throwing can be more easily selected with the D-pad. And for whatever reason, the Pikmin here just react much quicker than in the previous game, maybe due to advancements with the AI, allowing them to be consecutively thrown faster than before. These are all incredibly important changes as well, because with some Pikmin types receiving slight reworks along with the addition of 2 brand new ones, precision selection becomes more vital than ever. While red and blue Pikmin have returned without alteration, yellows have been reworked to resist the new and unwaveringly deadly electrical hazards, bringing them closer in line with the other types in the absence of bomb rocks. And the 2 new types are jam-packed with some of the most interesting and outside-of-the-box functionality the series has seen to match their striking designs. White Pikmin, for instance, are not only invulnerable to poison, they're also exceedingly fast, use their acute vision to spot and unearth underground treasure, and deal devastating damage to enemies upon consumption on account of their toxic physical makeup. Purple Pikmin sport unparalleled strength, matching the carrying capacity of 10 other Pikmin on their own, and their ability to deal the most damage and stun enemies with their immense weight is invaluable in combat. In the interest of balance, these types are not as easily reproduced and were assigned some minor weaknesses like the white's low attack power and the purple's sloth-like movement speed. But let's face it, there's just no balancing this. In most other games, this would be an easy target of criticism for me, and I do think more measures should have been taken to maintain the balance of Pikmin types. But I also think given the development timeline and motivations of the team, I'm more willing to accept that not all of Pikmin 2's changes could be as carefully considered as the previous game, as a desire to leave almost no ideas on the cutting room floor go a long way in speaking to a wider theme this game is trying to portray: freedom.
What we've done with Pikmin 2 is, in addition to giving the player an additional leader to control, we've added in new Pikmin colors. And while this doesn't necessarily increase the difficulty of the game, it increases the number of tools at the player's disposal to confront the tasks and challenges, the enemies and puzzles and whatnot that they'll encounter in the world. It gives the player a higher degree of freedom to choose how they're going to face the problems or enemies that stand before them. That was one of our focuses, to give players the freedom to choose how they want to play the game.
For the sake of differentiating the 2 games and the health of the series moving forward, I respect the choice to shift to a style that promotes a diversity of approaches to the game's challenges. Rather than shying away from more complex options, Pikmin 2 entrusts its players with the tools to approach objectives the way they want, from choosing exactly which treasures to prioritize to which Pikmin types to rely on, all while taking all the time in the world to soak it all in and become more intimately invested in the surrounding world. There's no better term that encapsulates Pikmin 2 than freedom. Until you go underground, where everything you thought you knew about Pikmin 2 is flipped on its head. The underground is where freedom goes to die. The reality of Pikmin 2 is that while all of these quality of life changes and additional mechanics do wonders to push the formula forward, they don't effectively address the big problem. In an era where game length was becoming more closely associated with value, Pikmin's detractors weren't seeing the value in a game that could theoretically be completed in just a handful of hours. They weren't replaying the 30-day cycle over and over like Miyamoto had envisioned. And so to address that criticism, the team decided to allow players to spend as much time in the world as they wanted. But in order for that time to feel valuable, it needed to be matched with valuable content. But at the same time, the developers were still faced with the challenge to complete the game's development while the new IP still had momentum. And so adding more zones with the same attention to detail of its predecessor wasn't seriously considered. Just as the Majora's Mask team decided to find a thematically appropriate way to reuse mechanics and character designs from Ocarina of Time to flesh out their sequel in an attempt to cut some corners where possible, the Pikmin 2 team decided to reuse the original game's levels for their surface exploration. Outside of the Valley of Repose, each of Pikmin 2's following zones are actually just slightly retooled versions of levels found in the previous game. One of them is even 2 different levels stitched together. And so, where's the additional content? That's where the caves come in. I don't think it's all that surprising that after an entire development cycle of intimately working with AI programming, Masamichi Abe found a way to churn out a variety of replayable dungeon designs to dramatically extend the life of the game. Where the design of Pikmin's and, by extension, Pikmin 2's carefully crafted surface zones promote diverse strategy, freedom, and in this game, oftentimes pressureless exploration of an open, natural environment, its caves feel like the complete opposite, filled with nothing but small chambers teeming with monsters and deadly hazards haphazardly connected by a series of claustrophobic tunnels that barely provide enough space for your entire Pikmin squad to navigate. And they are both full of surprises and sometimes absolutely nothing. And that's because the caves employ maybe the first and last usage of procedural generation I've ever seen in a Nintendo game, at least as far as level design goes. While each cave was assigned thematically appropriate terrain types, treasures, enemies, and hazards by the designers, it's all stitched together by a sophisticated algorithm randomly deciding where to place it all, often leading to some utterly nonsensical design. I can only imagine Miyamoto's first impression of these caves upon his periodic inspection, because they often feel diametrically opposed to the vision of the original game, prioritizing carefully crafted environments to make ship part locations feel as natural as possible. On the other hand, Pikmin 2's dungeon generating algorithm often likes to shield literal dead ends with a gate, which begs the question, what additional measures were put in place to ensure players fully interact with the design? Well, that's where the surprises come in. You may have noticed by this point that the Pikmin 2 discussion here isn't full of the same heartfelt memories my replaying of the previous game caused to flood back. And that's not because I don't have memories playing this game as a kid. I certainly do. It's because most of these dungeons are something out of a Pikmin-themed nightmare. Relentlessly stress-inducing and cruel. So cruel, in fact, that I think I chose to block out the trauma. You see, while it may be reasonable to assume that the designers wanted to reduce the amount of tension and stress the previous Pikmin instilled with its time limit and admittedly clunky bomb rock interactions, for instance, they actually just decided to concentrate that tension and reposition it just below the surface. Just as you begin to wonder where all the bomb rocks have gone, you realize they've all been strapped to the ceiling, conveniently dropping just as your Pikmin attempt to retrieve the next tantalizing treasure. If you're really lucky, it might even be an insta-killing boulder instead. More often than not, the surprises are anything but pleasant, and even when the expectations of traps are subverted by a gift or harmless wogpole, the implications of anything dropping from the ceiling are enough to jump scare me into believing Pikmin 2 has more in common with survival horror than real-time strategy. In all seriousness, though, it's clear the approach to cave design was to reintroduce the tension missing from the surface zones, and in an admittedly fun and bizarre way, challenge players to rethink their playstyle. Time ceases to pass below the surface, allowing players to actually take all of their time in the world to carefully assess each sublevel's insidious challenges. And boy, are these challenges insidious. I'm personally not the biggest fan of dealing with airdropped cannon beetles bugging out and throwing my Pikmin into the bottomless pit below, but I am quite the fan of exploiting their attacks to kill each other. With such limited space to work with and a desire to raise the difficulty bar, these caves feature the highest concentration and diversity of enemies in the series. And the random nature of the design often leads to both situations where you feel like a genius and others that leave your jaw agape at the straight-up unfairness. But with all of the frustrations and triumphs these dungeons provide, one thing is certain. Players must approach them carefully because the punishment for proceeding without caution is remarkably harsh on account of the Underground introducing its own set of jaw-tightening constraints. In the absence of onions, the Pikmin cannot naturally reproduce. Outside of some fairly limited circumstances, what you enter with is what you're stuck with until the end of the dungeon. And I think this is the single design choice that has allowed me to look past the frustrating elements of cave design and appreciate the unique dimension they bring to gameplay. In a way, it sells the themes of life and mortality even harder than the previous game, as players who aren't as emotionally tied to the personification of the Pikmin feel the cost and preciousness of each life lost. Which brings up a really interesting point. I think these caves, while obviously serving their purpose well of introducing variety to the play and extending the game's life, are indicative of an effort to explore Pikmin's themes from an entirely different angle. We've previously established that Miyamoto believes what makes Pikmin truly unique is the manner in which it measures your morals, capturing and communicating this aspect to players through the many poignant entries of Olimar's voyage log. But in giving Pikmin 2 a cursory glance, this appears to no longer be the case. As the stakes of the game shifted, the developers naturally reconsidered how best to diegetically deliver the necessary amount of tutorials and extrinsic motivation. But what they settled upon was an admittedly bizarre and oftentimes suffocating amount of humoristic interruptions by the duo's chief strategist, the Hakatate ship AI. It's certainly a less than subtle alternative to Olimar's log, and while I found the ship to be pretty annoying and off-putting as a child, I've since warmed up to it because I believe that's exactly the point. With such lines as, "Ready for another day of toiling for the profit of your company?" and "Leave it to me to think up catchy names for hit products. It is but one of my many talents." I think the ship is supposed to be unlikable. It's the condescending work supervisor everyone has encountered at one point or another that carries themselves with a level of pompous arrogance, thinly veiled in enthusiastic concern. With Olimar's return to the Pikmin planet so soon after the events of the original feeling particularly hasty and potentially out of character, the ship's condescending musings and company presidents' patronizing emails following the end of each day taking up the mantle of Olimar's log are a purposefully thinly veiled attempt at masking the true nature of the mission at hand. It wouldn't be misguided to label Pikmin 2 as a lateral move rather than a full step forward following the previous game. But in doing so, it tackles the essence of the predecessor's moral quandary from an entirely unique angle, and through the subtlety of its implications, goes to some much darker places. Call me crazy, pretentious, whatever, but in a truly miraculous fashion, I think Pikmin 2 manages to tie together an absolute mess of often diametrically opposed ideas by exploring the limits one pushes in the pursuit of greed through its uniquely capitalist angle, consequently feeling like one of the most elaborate trolls in video game history. Consider how the relationship between Olimar and the Pikmin changes after entering the Underground with respect to the new scenario. While the new goal of plundering the planet for its resources already unearths some ethical concerns, the symbiotic relationship between the Pikmin and Hakatations remains intact on its surface, and the atmosphere of said areas is anything but oppressive. As treasures are retrieved, so too are the spoils of fallen enemies and resources used to expand the Pikmin civilization. But that changes Underground, as the benefits of the relationship become heavily one-sided. What benefits do the Pikmin receive for following the captains to the ends of the company's greed? Underground their pickings are seized for meager profits as they continuously throw forth their lives to subdue some of the most hostile denizens the planet has to offer. And speaking of hostility, as the team ventures further and further beneath the surface, the atmosphere becomes not only suffocating, but increasingly peculiar. Music is something I neglected to cover with respect to Pikmin, because it's honestly something I find challenging to talk about given my inexperience. But you simply cannot talk about Pikmin 2 without acknowledging how much more sophisticated yet simultaneously bizarre the soundtrack became. Pikmin was already unique for featuring a dynamic soundtrack that seamlessly incorporated variations to the core tracks based on the time of day and even when the player found themselves engaged in combat. But Pikmin 2 dialed it up significantly while also shifting styles to match the change in tone. The surface zones are much bouncier and boisterous in that regard, but when you enter the underground, something feels immediately off. I don't know how else to describe these tracks other than being understatedly treacherous. They're oddly playful, but in a precarious and uncanny way, find the harmony in a combination of sounds that in most cases should probably never be mixed together. And yet, there's a melody in the chaos that seems to surface after finally finding your way in these dungeons that most often leave you feeling lost and confused. Even the Rest sublevel track that is meant to provide a brief moment of respite from the terrors of the underground and is full of resonance and tranquility still purposefully sneaks in notes that feel slightly off-key. These tracks feel truly alien in a way no other Pikmin game has achieved to match their inherent treachery thinly veiled in a layer of impish whimsy. A feeling that is simultaneously carried by the abundance of new creatures that go so far into the bizarro and even supernatural territory at times that what could even be seen as remotely comparable from the previous game ends up feeling like little more than a scratch at the surface. Take the careening dirigibug, for example. This mysterious creature, probably born in the darkest corner of Shigefumi Hino's mind, is suspended in the air by a cluster of balloons and somehow produces bomb rocks from its frothing mouth, felling both its foes and allies in a chaotic frenzy of explosions. Olimar's notes regarding it found in the game's bestiary like Picklopedia are as follows. This creature floats effortlessly through the air using gas-filled balloons. Both its appearance and its nature are antagonistic, and it is the only variant of its species in this ecosystem. It may be best to consider the possibility that it somehow wandered into this ecosystem from an entirely alien one. Positive proof does not exist at this point, but that is how this creature is currently classified. No matter how outlandish or experimental, a desire to more than double the amount of creatures to torment players left seemingly no idea untouched. Accompanying the dirigibug in upwards of 13 different species of bulborb are cannon beetles with heat-seeking boulders, a flint beetle variant that poisons Pikmin with its flatulence, the weevil variants for every hazard in the game, including more bomb rocks that also steal your treasures, and the Gatling Groink, which I continue to see in my nightmares. And simultaneously at the top of the food chain, while only found in the lowest of these low places, are some of the most deplorable abominations the Pikmin team has ever conceived, such as the segmented crobster, possibly the largest evidence of irradiated mutation on this planet, and the man at legs, an amalgamation of arachnorb and machine that guns down Pikmin with its endless barrages of explosive machine gun rounds. How this got by the ESRB is beyond me. But perhaps more or less subtly terrifying than any of these creatures is one of supposed supernatural origin that haunts all players' nightmares. A creature so aggressive and relentless, it leaves its accompanying dungeon feeling more analogous with a sort of watery hell than anything found in the natural world. I am, of course, talking about the Water Wraith. Yes, one does not simply talk about Pikmin 2 without also chronicling their experience in the submerged castle. Found in the most isolated corner of the perplexing pool as if to steer ignorant treasure hunters away, the submerged castle is easily the most memorable dungeon in the game, not just due to its notorious boss encounter, but also its subversive nature. It's the only cave whose entrance is submerged in water, allowing only a squad fully composed of blue Pikmin to enter, and yet it's littered with traps of every variety. The first sublevel on its own forces players to think outside of the box, immediately tasking them with taking down a fire-ensnared Bulblax with only blue Pikmin. And this aspect of the design prompts most players to approach the submerged castle with a heightened level of caution and patience, playing directly into its most deadly trap. For after spending just 5 minutes on any single floor, the Water Wraith introduces itself, crushing any and all Pikmin without hesitation should they find themselves trapped beneath its tireless stone rollers after succumbing to its endless pursuit. The ship questions whether or not its physical form is anchored in another dimension, with Olimar noting all witnesses report a descent into panic and near insanity in accordance with its sighting. The Water Wraith is the next logical step following the Smoky Prog, a creature, no, an unexplained phenomenon so bizarre and ceaselessly aggressive that its only perceivable characteristic is a desire to punish those whose arrogance leads them locked into its endless pursuit. It seeks greed and brings with it chaos. The Water Wraith thus feels like a deranged nod to critics of the previous game's time limit. In exchange for a Pikmin game without omnipresent time constraints and reduced tension at the surface, players who wish to get the most value from their games with respect to time will find themselves rushing to complete the submerged castle as quickly as possible, just as they did the previous game, while stumbling over its deadly traps and conspicuously placed enemies in order to escape the clutches of the Water Wraith. It will torment them, but it will be forever remembered. Because what is a game without tension? What I hope to have demonstrated here is that Pikmin 2 is a strange sequel. Without more information, it's difficult to assert what exactly their thinking was implementing some of the more outlandish ideas, like dungeons that design themselves. However conspiratorial my read into the game's deeper meaning may appear, I do think there is something here, embedded in the somewhat more cynical shift in tone, brimming with self-awareness with respect to the position the development team found themselves in. Pikmin was supposed to be the next Mario, but how do you follow up a game like Pikmin? I think Pikmin earnestly cuts a bit deeper than Super Mario Bros., born out of a desire to redefine what Nintendo's games could be. It provides fun, challenge, and accomplishment, but it also asks questions that go beyond what anyone could expect, prompting introspection regarding the cycles of life and death in the natural world. I think the remaining team behind Pikmin 2 understood this, asked themselves what their options were while identifying their limitations, and came to the conclusion that a sequel must be different. It must ask a different question. What we do know is that in pursuit of audience expansion, the team crafted Pikmin 2 with the hope that new players and critics alike would see enough of its value to reconsider the original game. And to do this, they threw all of their ideas at the wall to see what would stick. It's kind of like a crude, uncut gem in that regard. The resulting game ended up feeling a bit out there and incoherent, but through its refinement of the controls, exploration of different styles of play to the fullest extent, and a desire to recapture the fascination of fans and newcomers alike by continuing to flesh out the world, I think everyone was given at least something to latch onto. There is one more feature I'd like to briefly talk about, because its presence demonstrates why this game in particular is so highly revered among the Pikmin series' most dedicated fans. I used to really detest the ship's role in the story, particularly because I had grown attached to Olimar's perspective only after being exposed to it night after night with the original game. It's easy to lament Olimar's lack of character in Pikmin 2's story, but also naive, considering the fact that it's been more than preserved in the game's bestiary-like Piclopedia, a feature I've only come to appreciate more and more over time. As a child, I was fascinated by the creature compendium, learning more about my foes' behaviors while watching them stomp around. But only on this most recent playthrough have I found myself buried in the hundreds of journal entries found in the treasure hoard. While Olimar's sense of urgency that played a key role in cultivating this endearing character has indeed shifted to that of a more relaxed and even playful perspective given the stakes of the game, his tendency to make thoughtful and poignant observations has absolutely been preserved. It's crazy to think about how much effort must have gone into developing such a feature many players will likely skip over in their haste to get back into the game. But I think it matches the spirit of the sequel. Pikmin 2 is much more than a second attempt. In spite of its rough edges and shortcomings, it's a labor of love that spared no expense to further explore the concept and all of its possibilities, as dark or as playful as they may be. 15 days since Impact. It's time for the big one. I wholeheartedly credit Pikmin 3 with recapturing my interest in gaming after several years of inactivity. But how can I best illustrate that? It certainly made some contentious changes that left some longtime fans unsatisfied, but it also stretched the possibilities for what a Pikmin game could be, thus leading to the release of perhaps the most rawly addictive addition to the series. Thankfully, its entire vision has already been laid out for me. Following the release of Pikmin 2, it soon became time for Nintendo to begin assessing how much interest the Pikmin brand was able to truly generate in order to formulate plans for the future. But as the dust began to settle, the ensuing results were a little less than inspiring. While both games were received fairly well overall by players and critics alike, they each rested comfortably outside of the GameCube's collection of bestsellers, moving roughly 1.6 and 1.1 million copies respectively. Pikmin was, by most accounts, unfortunately not the next Mario as Miyamoto had envisioned. And while that didn't fully dissuade Nintendo from conducting further experiments targeting other hardware, it became clear that jump-starting the development of more new Pikmin games was no longer the priority it had been leading up to the launch of the series. Thus began the long road to Pikmin 3. Beginning with the Game Boy Advance and later the Nintendo DS and even the 3DS at one point, a handful of developers began experimenting with new styles of play for Pikmin that failed to generate confidence internally. The platform that did show the most potential to push the series forward while remaining faithful to the original goal proved to be the upcoming Nintendo Wii. Motion controls provided a unique opportunity for Pikmin. While the original GameCube control scheme proved to work surprisingly well given the controller's limitations, there was certainly still room for improvement. While the Wii Remote and Nunchuck configuration was missing a second analog stick to direct the Pikmin, what it offered was the ability to intuitively bring the precision targeting capabilities closer in line with other devices using the optical sensor, just as it did in the system menu. However, with just 5 staff members developing prototypes for several years, a brand new Pikmin project for the Wii failed to make real headway. But in the meantime, fans were at least given reason to believe that Pikmin had not been forgotten. At the tail end of 2008, Nintendo revealed that a select few GameCube titles that could take full advantage of motion controls would be re-released in the Japanese market for the Wii under the moniker of New Play Control. Among these games were Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, the Metroid Prime games, and of course, both Pikmin 1 and 2. As progress with a new Pikmin control scheme began to take shape, Nintendo had tasked some members of the team with adapting its enhancements to the original games in order to begin building some sort of Pikmin presence on the Wii, with Shigefumi Hino at the helm.
We knew that Pikmin was a game best played with very simple play control. Accordingly, we had a belief that using the Wii Remote would make the game feel even better. Even though we had to spend a long time and went through lots of trial and error working through the play control elements, we were pleased with the results. Most importantly, I believe the play controls are ideal. The biggest improvement from the original version, other than the availability of motion control, is the new feature that enables the player to go back to the save points in the past. We were discussing the possibilities of other enhancements too, but in the end, we decided that we wanted to focus on providing new Wii owners with Pikmin as soon as possible.
I recently got a taste of these ports for the first time to better understand the progression of the series. And while I think I prefer the original controls in this case for a few small reasons in addition to the sheer amount of hours I've put into mastering them over the years, upon release, new play control Pikmin presented a strong argument in favor of further exploring the possibilities for the series under this new control scheme, while also giving a few indications of how some of the core design could change and what would be prioritized in the following title. A few quality of life changes that I feel go under the radar include revised bomb rock interactions, thank God, and the ability to change Pikmin queued up for throwing on the fly, just like in the sequel. Particularly notable in Hino's eyes was also the revised save system, letting players more easily replay challenging days and even go back in time without having to begin an entirely new playthrough. But perhaps most importantly, motion control revolutionized the way Pikmin could be controlled by decoupling aim from movement, extending the natural throwing range, and opening up space for new tactics and more dynamic combat by making the targeting itself snappier and more precise than the GameCube's analog stick could ever offer. Mysteriously, the new play control version of Pikmin 2 wouldn't be released in North America until 2012, 3 years after the previous. And I can only imagine this was because the original's enhancements were yet again unable to excite a wider audience, barely scratching a total of 500,000 units sold worldwide. With such a low attach rate relative to the Wii's immense install base, it was looking like Pikmin's future was nothing short of dismal. But all the while, hope for more series entries interestingly prevailed in large part due to Shigeru Miyamoto repeatedly dropping verbal hints indicating we hadn't seen the last of Pikmin. First, in a 2007 interview with IGN. Then, at a developer roundtable hosted at E3 2008, until finally it was confirmed at E3 2011 that while Pikmin 3 was slowly taking shape in the background, the target platform shifted after seeing what was in store for Nintendo's future. Pikmin 3 would debut not for the Wii, but for a new piece of hardware that felt tailor-made for delivering the ultimate Pikmin experience. Pikmin 3 made its first public appearance headlining Nintendo's E3 2012 presentation, where 3 key areas of focus were made abundantly clear. The game would be fully utilizing the Wii U's capabilities to revolutionize Pikmin's controls using the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, as well as the gamepad, explore new possibilities for strategy thanks to the newly enhanced AI and inclusion of even more additional leaders, and bring Pikmin's visuals into the modern era with the console's HD output. In fact, seeing how Pikmin could potentially look in high resolution played a large role in the project shifting from Wii to Wii U.
It was everything. When we first ported it to the Wii U, the resolution, the processing power, the controls, and more were there. With the previous entries, you couldn't really see what each individual Pikmin was doing. With a lower resolution, if we showed only one Pikmin, you wouldn't be able to see the whole group. In a strategy game, if you can't see the whole group, it's not good for the player. With higher resolution, you can really see the whole group of Pikmin while seeing what each individual Pikmin is up to.
While the graphical power of the Wii U allowed Pikmin to be portrayed more beautifully and in more detail than ever before, the additional processing power working in tandem took full advantage of the high capacity for detail by allowing individual Pikmin to perform their own complex tasks. Pikmin were now able to retrieve pieces of a fruit, treasure, or bridge one by one, moving back and forth between 2 points of interest on their own and off screen, while the player character was off performing their own task.
When it comes to Pikmin games, management of your units is strict, but being able to coordinate them to work well together is why it's a fun game. To actualize that, we needed to have everything in the game world correctly moving at the same time, including the off-screen elements. With old game making techniques, we made it look like things were moving appropriately, while we in actuality hid some elements. However, in Pikmin 3, lots of different things are moving at the same time. In other words, we needed a real, sophisticated system to clearly show all the animated elements. For that, Wii U was the best fit.
And at the center of it all, in addition to the refined pointer controls enabling the action, was the Wii U gamepad players could leverage in order to get the most out of the increased possibilities for strategy. With a touch of the map screen, players could assign a destination for one of the 4 leaders to begin trekking to on their own as if they were a Pikmin. You don't have to look far and wide to find someone who believes the Wii U was a complete flop, a failure from top to bottom. Some might argue that the Wii U was too ahead of its time, better served as a prototype for its more refined and prosperous successor. But for Pikmin, the Wii U could not have come at a better time, as this trifecta of ideals converging with the new console's technical advancements and unique applications set the development of this ambitious new project into motion, just like the GameCube did with the original game. In addition to all of these new and revitalizing ideas, the team utilized their experience developing the previous games in order to craft what they believed the original should have been.
Pikmin 2 was made after listening to the different things in 1 people were unhappy with, and it filled those gaps. But if you fix the things fans are not happy with, does that make a fun game? That was a lingering question we had. From that point, we thought of what 1 should have been in the first place, even considering the reactions to the multiple endings, and decided to make 3. At the same time, we looked at the Wii U, which was in development, and felt if we had its capabilities at our disposal, we could better make the game we envisioned.
I've already made it abundantly clear on this channel how much I adore Pikmin 3, as it also could not have presented itself to me at a more perfect time, after a few too many disappointing years that led me to feel completely disillusioned with gaming as a whole. This reveal helped change that, and was the primary reason I bought into the Wii U. I was fascinated by the new creatures, Pikmin types, and additional characters. But what I had no way of knowing at the time was that, upon its release, I would be greeted with arguably the most refined Pikmin experience to date. A game that challenged my perception of motion controls, captured my attention for hours upon hours in pursuit of mastery, and tied everything together with its passing of the torch scenario that left me grinning from ear to ear from beginning to end. Pikmin 3 begins by reimagining the original game's concept for a new audience. In place of Hecate, Captain Olimar, and Louie are 3 brand new characters setting out on a dire mission to ensure a future for Kopai, their home planet facing extinction due to a rapidly encroaching food shortage. After one of their scout vessels reports the existence of edible matter on a distant planet, Alf, the engineer, Brittany, the botanist, and Charlie, the captain of the SS Drake, make their preparations to investigate the newly dubbed planet of PNF 404 279,000 light-years away. What they don't know is that PNF 404 is a very special planet, one that has a habit of greeting its intrepid guests without grace, just as Olimar did before them. The trio crash lands onto the surface of the planet, scattering to different regions in the process. While the new scenario feels quite reminiscent of the original game in that regard, Pikmin 3 distinguishes itself first by entrusting players with a multitude of goals. Not only must they begin by recovering Alf's missing team members, there's also the food shortage to consider. With the remaining food supply following the crash lasting just 3 days, the pressure to begin collecting fruit is felt immediately, as each piece retrieved not only helps to ensure the survival of their home planet, but also extends the time limit of the mission. Given the fact that one of the design goals was to appeal to a wider audience by reframing some of the previous game's more off-putting elements, I think the implementation of this time constraint was pretty clever, as the exact amount of tension is more directly perceivable. And because single pieces of fruit can potentially extend the timer by multiple days, the difficulty is much more forgiving. But that's also not all, as not long after reawakening, it's revealed to Alf that during the crash, the SS Drake's cosmic drive key allowing the ship to jump into hyperspace has gone missing. And so while the team begins to regroup and collect fruit, the most pressing matter of all becomes the cosmic drive key. Because no amount of fruit can save them or their planet should they be unable to return home. As they begin investigating its disappearance, things also begin to feel as if they're not quite as they initially seemed. Because for a distant planet that appears to be relatively undisturbed, there sure are a lot of stray data files lying around, indicating someone else who understands its many life forms has already been here. It's not long before this mysterious figure is revealed to be Captain Olimar on his third expedition to the Pikmin planet. And while I think I would have preferred to have his identity be revealed a bit later and more subtly, I don't think this scenario often gets as much credit as it's due. I think it's fair to say Pikmin 3 is a bit lacking in terms of story and character development, as the new characters catch some flack for being particularly one-note in comparison to Olimar's deluge of insight and introspection from the original game. While the circumstances of its development led to the cultivation of this isolating and introspective tone that really has yet to be matched in the series, Pikmin 2 began exploring a new direction because the shift in narrative didn't allow Olimar's monologues to take center stage. They tried something different, something weird, and yet much of what was so special about the original story was preserved in the optional flavor text. You just had to look for it. With Pikmin 3 releasing just short of a decade after its predecessor, some things were bound to change, because in that time, the development team had changed a lot, with Masamichi Abe's directorial role being taken up by long-standing programmer Yuji Kondo, for instance. With Motoi Okamoto leaving Nintendo in 2008 and Kazumi Yamaguchi, the credited scriptwriter for the second game's Piccolopedia, not being retained for this game, I can see why a lot of that subtext was lost. And in addition, the narrative was not as much of a priority for the team, so much as the desire to fully explore the possibilities for gameplay afforded by the new hardware.
For this game, beyond discussing the necessity of a funny reveal in the main story like Pikmin 2, the direction was to remove anything that wasn't necessary as much as possible to let the player push their score higher and higher. Even though there are 3 heroes, it wasn't about giving them their own personalities and role, but instead, designing them as throwable tools. It was something like, as long as they can be used to make it to places at different heights, that's fine. In other words, it's like the 3 of them are included in the game not due to their necessity in the story, but as facets of the game itself.
This is, without a doubt, a contentious shift, but it would be disingenuous to suggest that the team failed to craft an engaging story regardless. It's just much lighter and more traditional this time around to support the gameplay. With the 3 characters working so closely together, a more straightforward, dialogue-driven method of storytelling was chosen to deliver more instances of moment-to-moment motivation to the player. And as such, I think what character development for the main cast was lost was made up for by the mysteries of the narrative. While juggling the fruit supply, the team members find themselves on this wild goose chase following a new signal in each area in search of the cosmic drive key, presumably held by Olimar. And in the midst, there's all sorts of hints revealing what has happened behind the scenes and even some subversions to keep players on their toes. Many of the trappings of a Pikmin tale have been preserved, or better yet, reimagined through the breadcrumb trail of Olimar's stray data files. There just isn't as much text to flesh out the main characters. At the end of the day, I believe that while the story doesn't do as great a job of capturing some of the deeper themes that make Pikmin so fascinating, I think it serves its purpose well. There's a little something for everyone here. It helps introduce Pikmin to a new audience without retreading the exact same ground as before. But what is old has also not been abandoned, as I certainly had a great time chasing Olimar's trail upon the game's release. And given the fact that Pikmin 3's design goals were anchored in how the new hardware could evolve the gameplay, I'm pretty satisfied with that. So, for that matter, how has the multi-captain approach evolved in Pikmin 3? Well, what I think is so interesting is how multifaceted the mechanic has become. The biggest limitations of Pikmin 2's equivalent system were that only one captain could be controlled at a time, and the two could not interact with each other in any meaningful way when grouped up. So Pikmin 3 sought to remedy both issues with the addition of two new mechanics. On the strategic side, the Go Here function allows the player to assign a travel destination with the gamepad as elegantly as it was first demonstrated in the game's initial reveal. The gamepad screen displays a highly comprehensive real-time map that can be viewed in tandem with active gameplay. But with a swipe of the screen, players can pause the action to pick a location on the touchscreen while the perspective on the TV shifts overhead to reveal the respective area in more detail. And while the information provided is valuable enough on its own, I find the additional functionality of this feature so impressive to this day with respect to the level design. There's 4 brand new zones here, designed from the ground up to take full advantage of the new features while expanding upon the original game's philosophy. They're just as, if not more sprawling, and littered with shortcuts of all different kinds. And because of this, there's typically a multitude of different routes to any particular location. Not only does the Go Here function always find a route to the destination, it also prioritizes the fastest one just as the Pikmin do. But the real reason this is so impressive is because of how much information the game is simultaneously processing. No clearer is this represented than in one of my favorite levels, the Twilight River. It's a pretty innovative level by Pikmin standards. Instead of placing the landing site at the center of the stage, it's at the center of one of 2 land masses that are connected by a river. In order to traverse the stage, lily pads ferry the squad downstream with multiple different points of access on either side of the riverbank. And because assembling a bridge to reach a new Pikmin type is one of this area's primary objectives, there is a lot of movement going on here. While the Pikmin each wait their turn ferrying themselves back and forth across the river with bridge pieces in tow, so too can a captain utilize the sophisticated pathfinding to escort another squad across the lily pads, all while the player is doing something else in yet another area with no hiccups in the system. The only thing that has changed since the demonstration was a reduction in the amount of active captains, because 3 over the initial 4 offered just the right amount of complexity. With just 2 button presses, switching between all 3 captains is seamless. There's so little potential downtime with this system that the only limitation is the player's own ability to keep track of what everyone is doing, blasting the strategic ceiling wide open. But for players who aren't as interested in multitasking, the difficulty ensures that it's not required, while the many leaders are additionally justified by an increased presence of traversal puzzles. Just as the captains can be directed like the Pikmin, so too can they be thrown to reach new areas. These puzzles were even more sparse than any opportunities to truly multitask in Pikmin 2. But in this game, they're fundamental additions to the level design. The idea is first introduced in the Garden of Hope and more thoroughly explored in the distant tundra, where Alf and Brittany have once again become separated, tossing different types of Pikmin to each other across the water in order to reunite. But as the story progresses, the team often finds themselves in situations where all 3 must be utilized to reach the furthest corners of the map and recover more fruit. No matter how light or complex, each area features their own unique take on traversal, in addition to some of the more common mechanics and shortcuts. The Twilight River obviously has the lily pads, but the Tropical Wilds has these weighted blocks in different locations. The distant tundra sees the team bulldozing through caves, and the Garden of Hope feels like 2 areas in one with its suspended platforms and adjacent water-dominant zone. There's even a few situations where splitting up leaders plays a role in combat too. In the Tropical Wilds, for instance, there's an encounter with a shaggy longlegs that stomps between 2 different arenas. Yellow Pikmin naturally excel against this enemy type, but unique to this encounter are the fire geysers in the alternate arena. What I clearly failed to recognize in this footage was that instead of walking back and forth whenever the spider attempted its escape, it would have made more sense to switch between squads at a moment's notice. While examples like these are uncommon, I just think it's cool to see that the applications of this feature were considered to the widest extent, from multitasking to puzzle solving, and even the combat, which has never felt more fluid and engaging thanks to the new Pikmin types and complete overhaul of the controls. Messing around in new play control Pikmin has only made me appreciate Pikmin 3 more, because while it certainly opened up brand new possibilities for the control, it also exposed me to a couple of issues I hadn't even realized were considered in the shift to 3. Perhaps most subtly was the replacement of the swarm mechanic with the new lock-on and charge. Swarming enemies and ship parts with a C-stick worked great in the original game, especially considering the lack of refined pathfinding the Pikmin possess. In the traditional circular formation, it was really easy to lose track of Pikmin stuck behind walls and other obstacles, so being able to direct their movement was important. But I think the intuitiveness of this mechanic is somewhat lost in the motion controls that excel at snappy target acquisition rather than fluid movement. For that reason, the feature was presumably replaced with the context-sensitive charge ability along with much improved pathfinding, as the Pikmin are generally clustered closer to the active leader while following in a more linear formation. I still really love the swarm feature, indicating that both control schemes work within their own merits. But I also think simplifying this aspect for Pikmin 3 was the right call, as Pikmin now rarely get stuck on objects and move much more predictably in the midst of combat, which leads nicely into the next issue. In Pikmin 1, the player is very rarely throwing and repositioning at the same time. The combat is pretty rudimentary in that regard. And so once they've built an understanding of Olimar's throwing arc, opportunities that expose the true reliability of the target reticle locked to the ground rarely present themselves. That changes when aim has been decoupled from movement, as it becomes pretty difficult and even unintuitive to target airborne enemies or those whose weak point isn't on the ground when you're unable to predict how the Pikmin will travel through the air. I don't know how Pikmin 3 manages this, but a revision of the target reticle made throwing so much more intuitive. Where you take aim is exactly where the Pikmin will land, to the point in which the reticle will seamlessly shift between targets in the foreground and background. I remember being pretty frustrated by this in a few instances during my first playthrough, before I had tested motion aim in the Wii re-release. But now, I am just astounded at how great it feels to throw Pikmin, made doubly so by the brand new types. Balance issues aside, I really enjoyed the addition of purple and white Pikmin in the previous game, as they felt like natural extensions of the core designs with some really interesting functionality to boot. But over the course of the game, acquiring them in caves just became an absolute nuisance, especially in the notorious case of the Doomsday apparatus. Pikmin 3 took a great step forward in this regard by returning to the fundamentals. All types, including the new ones, have their own onion with which they can reproduce. However, in order to reduce clutter, upon discovery, new motherships are consolidated into one large onion housing all of the Pikmin. Even ignoring the quality of life changes, there's something so much more satisfying about pummeling enemies and structures with the new rock Pikmin, even if they are a bit strategically shallow. In that respect, the winged Pikmin more than make up by trading overall combat prowess for their supreme mobility, allowing them to retrieve objects more efficiently than any of the other types. While their use cases are more limited, what the new types excel at is encouraging players to engage with all of the new mechanics and control options. And I think this is no more clearly demonstrated than in the game's boss fights. Pikmin boss fights have only gotten better over time, but in this game, they not only provide the single best uses of these mechanics, they also amp up the spectacle to an exorbitant degree. In one fight, you're using rock Pikmin to chip away at the armored Maudad's hard exoskeleton to expose its weak points. And in another, you're engaging the Scornet Maestro's own army in aerial warfare, slipping through its ceaseless barrages to protect your own units from the Scornet horde. Every type's natural abilities were considered for these foes, and some of them are so massive that locking on offers an entirely new perspective of the action that pairs so nicely with the motion aim. To be clear, Pikmin 3's gamepad-only controls are certainly less than ideal, especially so in these boss fights. But that's because the game was designed to utilize the Wii pointer controls and gamepad's navigation and unit management in tandem. It's unconventional and novel. I played this game for hours and hours on the couch with the gamepad screen propped up on the coffee table to be viewed with the TV interchangeably. And while I know the average player groans at the thought of having to use motion controls or being force-fed the gamepad, while I was playing Pikmin 3, the only thought to cross my mind was how I could not believe how perfectly attuned this console was with offering the most refined and mechanically immersive Pikmin experience. And to make matters even sweeter, this story mode is just a third of the game. By this point, it should have become clear that I've neglected to talk about the previous game's additional modes, and that's because while they were a nice bonus to somewhat extend the life of each game, I've never felt their implementation was particularly noteworthy. Pikmin 1's challenge mode, tasking players with amassing the largest amount of Pikmin possible in a given time frame, while admittedly pretty fun and addictive, was also fairly light on content, only featuring 5 marginally remixed versions of the story mode stages. Pikmin 2, on the other hand, introduced 30 multi-floor missions built out of the cave system, but I've never felt compelled to continue playing them as the slow and careful approach to their treacherous challenges didn't feel particularly conducive to fast and frantic time-limited challenges. Pikmin 3's mission mode feels like the perfect compromise between these two bonus modes, because rather than treating it like an afterthought, it was given the attention of a core mode. Most notable is the fact that instead of reusing stages from the story mode or introducing weird restrictions, these are fully fledged, brand new Pikmin arenas based upon the existing terrain types. In fact, the team was confident enough in these levels to place them under the spotlight for the game's E3 reveal. While a retreading of the main bosses isn't particularly compelling, the two other modes that make use of these arenas certainly are: collect treasure and battle enemies. I think anyone who believes Pikmin 3 was too easy needs to give this mode a shot, because they put all of your acquired Pikmin skills to the test, and through a simple but much needed scoring system, really push players to their absolute limits. It's easy enough to clear the level with enough points to achieve a bronze or silver medal, but in order to prove true mastery, one must gather every single piece of treasure and defeat every single enemy within the time limit in order to reach true completion and be awarded the platinum medal. Playing to push my own score in the previous games was fine, but being able to see how my performance stacked up against other players with the new leaderboard functionality motivated me to squeeze every last second of added efficiency out of my strategies. My only regret is not seeing the true value of this mode upon release, as it was supplemented with additional waves of downloadable content during Nintendo's first foray into the DLC model that are no longer available on the Wii U. And for just $5 for a set of brand new levels with unique mechanics and terrain types, I think the value speaks for itself. I think that is ultimately why I find Pikmin 3 to be such a compelling game. With the addition of a fleshed out and challenging mission mode, and even the chaotic party game reminiscent bingo battle mode for multiplayer, there is quite literally something for everyone here. One of the biggest complaints I think one could have regarding Pikmin 3 is that the story mode is simply too easy. And for longtime fans who already understand how Pikmin works, yes, that is absolutely the case. Rock Pikmin and Winged Pikmin are probably a little too strong, and the reframing of the time constraints through the crew's food supply is really forgiving. I ended my latest playthrough with a surplus of 66 jars of juice, and even in the unlikely event players do fail, much like other games, they're given the opportunity to get right back up where they were and try again. But even as a relatively seasoned Pikmin player, this doesn't bother me, because while the skill floor has undoubtedly lowered since the GameCube releases in order to appeal to as wide an audience as possible, the ceiling has simultaneously been raised so much higher, and it's left up to players to decide whether they want to simply enjoy the ride or push the limits of what can be achieved with the new mechanics. It's a somewhat different approach, but absolutely in line with the spirit of the previous games. Instead of hoping players will see the value and replay the story several times, or haphazardly bloating the story's content as an overcorrection, I think Pikmin 3 strikes a fine balance by alternatively providing a tightly designed yet fairly robust campaign with an abundance of new tools to augment the challenge. Pikmin 3 is the kind of game that challenges its players to find their own fun within it. And I think that's the exact approach this entry needed in order to secure a future for Pikmin. It's hard to look at Pikmin 3 and not come to the conclusion that with its release, a dichotomy was forming in the series. I do love Pikmin 2. I love how eccentric it is, and have only come to appreciate it more after learning the circumstances of its development. But for me, actually playing it doesn't come close to Pikmin 3. Nothing can truly replace the original game either, as the tone and writing is still unmatched. But by reimagining what the original could be with all of the lessons learned during the tumultuous development of its predecessors, Pikmin 3 is one of few games where I can feel the passion that went into its creation simply by picking up the controller and discovering what I can do with it. It makes the single strongest case for motion controls in any game I've played, and perhaps tragically, also makes the strongest case for the gamepad of any Wii U game. In that respect, the fact that Pikmin 3 even exists after the series failed to so much as scratch the expectations set for it indicates that its development was fueled by nothing short of pure passion.
We didn't make Pikmin 3 simply to extend the series. We made it because we wanted to. We felt that the new hardware, Wii U, was really perfect for Pikmin. Now that we've built the game, I'm finally spending a lot of time playing it, and I'm really happy we made it. It may sound like I'm exaggerating, but it feels like the Wii U was made for Pikmin. It's a bold statement, but that's how satisfied I am with the game. And for the experts out there, I can say that this game feels like the ultimate evolution of the original Pikmin. I hope with this new game, it can build the framework of what would be a new kind of real-time simulation game.
Miyamoto, I genuinely could not agree more. 25 days since Impact. I think I've been able to effectively convey what makes this trilogy of games so special. Each of them have been able to offer a unique angle or improve upon an existing design choice while staying true to the initial essence of the series. However, there's still a bit more to cover because Pikmin has demonstrated even more overlooked potential in its side excursions. The road to Pikmin 4 has been long and difficult, but in retrospect, there was a decent amount of different things to be excited about in the meantime. After not only an entire generational gap, but a near decade-long absence, Pikmin 3 debuted for the Wii U in 2013 after missing its intended release during the Wii U's launch window. It was just as well received as the previous entries and helped to finally establish some momentum for the struggling console, but not nearly enough to save it from its impending doom. No matter my own opinion of its value, the market was simply not interested in the Wii U, and its game's sales suffered accordingly. Pikmin 3 ended up selling roughly 1.3 million copies, outshining its direct predecessor, yet failing to denote major progress even when proportionally accounting for its platform's weaker install base relative to the GameCube. And yet, Nintendo was no less deterred from continuing to support the game with the aforementioned content updates, while Miyamoto was silently preparing to unveil something surprisingly ambitious. 20 years following the disastrous production of the original Super Mario Bros. Movie, Nintendo took their first careful steps into re-entering the world of film with a series of animated short movies starring not Mario, but Pikmin. While other properties remained off the table, Miyamoto saw the potential in a film adaptation of Pikmin because it would allow Nintendo to further showcase the personality and character of the creatures in ways the games themselves were unable to do. Thus, a partnership was formed between Nintendo and Dynamo Pictures to bring Pikmin to the Tokyo International Film Festival, as well as the 3DS and Wii U in 2014. These animations are simply fantastic, While Olimar shows up in 2 of the 3, true to the nature of the project, the Pikmin themselves are undoubtedly the main characters, and their curiosity and enthusiasm is wonderfully captured in addition to the joys and even a lighter interpretation of the sorrows that encapsulate the Pikmin experience. With Miyamoto serving as executive producer on the project and even producing the storyboards himself, I think these animations set the correct standard and even laid the foundation for Nintendo's multimedia deals in the future. But most notably for the Pikmin series in particular, they may have even been an indication of Nintendo's plans for the franchise moving forward.
I wanted to particularly take Pikmin and bring them into that sort of short movie format because within the game, we weren't really able to depict the Pikmin individually in the ways that we wanted to, and so I still have a lot of ideas about what I want to do with Pikmin. Nothing has been decided yet, but we will continue to make Pikmin games.
Given the fact that Pikmin 3 was released fairly early into the Wii U's life in spite of its delays, I think many fans were expecting, or at the very least hoping, that a follow-up in similar fashion to Pikmin 2 would be developed and released before the end of the generation. And at one point, that very well may have been the case, as reports indicating it was not only in development, but in fact, notoriously confirmed by Miyamoto to be very close to completion, began circulating as early as 2015. Pikmin 4 obviously did not release for the Wii U, and it's still unclear whether that was because the console's life was cut short with its development shifting platforms, the project itself was facing its own trouble, or that it was all a big misunderstanding, which I have begun to believe more and more with each passing year. Instead, Pikmin made its expected return in a completely unexpected fashion during a pivotal moment for Nintendo's turnaround in the advent of their latest console. Just 1 month before the Switch was officially unveiled, in the grand finale of a fairly inconsequential Nintendo Direct dedicated solely to the 3DS, as if to suggest the final nail of the Wii U's coffin had been struck. The latest entry in the Pikmin series was unveiled, and it definitely wasn't Pikmin 4. Oh hey Pikmin, I feel confident in saying this game was woefully misunderstood, because I was one of those doing the misunderstanding. At a glance, it looked cheap, more akin to that of a mobile release than one for a platform that was capable of breathing new life into home console games that were released less than a generation ago. And the shift in perspective left most fans puzzled rather than excited. If games like Ocarina of Time, Donkey Kong Country Returns, and the latest Super Smash Bros. Game could all be successfully developed for the 3DS, what led Pikmin to abandoning its roots in favor of shifting focus to a 2D puzzle platformer? That is what I, and what I can only imagine many fans of Pikmin and Nintendo as a whole were feeling, as the narrative surrounding this game's announcement was overwhelmingly negative. Not only did the game seemingly fail to capture what players found appealing about Pikmin, it presented itself at a time when consumer confidence in Nintendo was at an all-time low. Many franchises who were seemingly left on hold during the current generation were instead receiving spin-off entries of various levels of quality that came across as completely out of touch. And Hey Pikmin was just the latest in the trend. Now that I've finally played it for myself, I can say with certainty that I'm suddenly more interested in many of those games because, as it turns out, Hey Pikmin is an admittedly flawed, yet surprisingly fun game. And reality continues to prove that video game development is not nearly as simple as dragging and dropping game systems from one platform to another. With no direct evidence explaining how Hey Pikmin came to be, I've formulated my own theory. Since we know experiments regarding a Pikmin game on 3DS were conducted and subsequently abandoned in its initial years, I think Miyamoto changed his mind during the development of Pikmin 3, specifically as he was producing the Pikmin animations. Because a smaller scale spin-off approach from an alternative perspective would allow Nintendo to depict the Pikmin in-game as they were able to with the animations. While the 3DS was likely unable to depict Pikmin's hundreds of characters to a suitable degree of quality, what it could provide was a more action-oriented experience utilizing the touchscreen for control, employ both screens in tandem to portray a large sense of scale on a 2D plane, and capture the charm of the characters with much smaller groups of Pikmin. Hey Pikmin is by no means a masterpiece, but by tapping into the unique characteristics of its platform, it introduces some fun action elements while shining Pikmin under a new light with its alternate perspective. Where Hey Pikmin falls in the wider Pikmin narrative isn't exactly important, because the setup is about as fleshed out as one fitting of the New Super Mario Bros. Series. Instead of pushing the story forward, the game conveniently reuses the tried and true crash landing scenario to place Captain Olimar on a new planet that is conveniently inhabited by the creatures of PNF 404. It's merely a means of introducing the new goal. Instead of collecting ship parts, Olimar is on a hunt for a new resource to fuel his ship called Sparklium that is both naturally occurring and occasionally found in much larger quantities, marking the return of treasures to the series. Olimar thus finds himself using his new jetpack and employing the help of the Pikmin to circumvent puzzles and defeat enemies while heading to the end of a series of 2D stages in search of Sparklium. The overall structure of the game is pretty unremarkable in that regard, and instead of having to manage time or propagate the Pikmin populace, Pikmin are commonly found in the wild in small groups, with a total squad size never exceeding 20 per stage. And without any sort of time constraints or even true limits on the amount of Pikmin that can be recovered in a stage, there's never really a substantial amount of extrinsic pressure placed on the player. From front to back, Hey Pikmin is a fairly slow-paced and relatively unchallenging experience, but that never stopped me from enjoying it. Where I think Hey Pikmin shines is how it successfully translates much of the spirit of Pikmin to a platform that had no business hosting a true Pikmin game. Just as Pikmin 3 was able to innovate upon the act of throwing Pikmin, making it more engaging with its use of motion control, Hey Pikmin brings that simple pleasure to the 3DS with a precise tap of the touchscreen. And with Sparklium filling a similar niche to coins in 2D Mario, there are opportunities to demonstrate your precision all over the place. I don't know how else to demonstrate, it's just fun and satisfying to grab this stuff. Minus the additional captains, Hey Pikmin also feels like a somewhat natural extension of the Pikmin entry that incorporated more light puzzle solving than either of its predecessors. But what I think is most appealing to me is how the game embraces both the limitations and unique opportunities offered by the shift in perspective. Yellow Pikmin are surprisingly my favorite type here because of how well they demonstrate the integration of both screens. Soaring from one to another to retrieve treasures on another plane or activate sources of electricity to raise platforms. And while the winged Pikmin are a little underutilized overall, they facilitate a new feature that surprisingly has yet to be implemented in the main games. They're a direct upgrade to Olimar's own mobility. The combat itself lacks the depth of options facilitated by 3 dimensions, but it remains tense even in the abundance of smaller enemies simply because they cannot be easily avoided, often surprising players from the top screen. But what sells the shift in perspective most of all are the bosses, because only this game could strike a new degree of fear with the single most commonly found enemy in the series. What this game does best is shine a magnifying glass on the action, offering the player a chance to get a better idea of what it might actually feel like to be Captain Olimar. The perspective itself makes the average encounter more tense in both a visual and functional sense, but it also offers players many more opportunities to be amused by and grow attached to the Pikmin, which is why I think this concept ended up receiving the green light. There are an excessive amount of short cutscenes depicting the Pikmin in silly and endearing situations. And as such a huge fan of these characters, they were a delight to witness from beginning to end, just as they were in the short movies. Hey Pikmin is certainly not Pikmin 4, but to suggest that it was a lazily thrown together cash grab like I once believed is undoubtedly inaccurate. While playing, I felt as though the developers at Arzest took the time to try to understand Pikmin and translate as many elements as they realistically could while offering a unique twist on the formula. If I had the choice to erase this game from existence, I certainly would not. Because as a spin-off project meant to raise brand awareness and give Pikmin fans something to play in the long wait for Pikmin 4, it's much easier to appreciate. Unfortunately, Hey Pikmin fell victim to a deadly combination of confusing communication, great expectations, and poor timing, as its announcement was received as a cheap replacement to what fans were already expecting. And by the time of its release, months after Nintendo fans have been swept up by the latest and greatest console, rather than being met with more vitriol, it simply went overlooked. Following the release of Hey Pikmin, the series continued to drift from public consciousness. I can't say for certain, but I think its reception played a role in the ceasing of communication between Miyamoto and fans regarding the future of the franchise. To give a fairly niche series and its insignificant spin-off entry that much credit could definitely be a reach, as Nintendo's approach to communication in general was shifting in accordance with the recent changes in leadership and overall vision of the company. Regardless, the single largest champion of Pikmin within Nintendo had grown increasingly tight-lipped while seemingly shifting some of his own focus away from the direct supervision of Nintendo's games to overseeing new and ambitious multimedia deals. Maybe Pikmin was the first step in igniting that interest? Not only that, with Takashi Tezuka spearheading the resurgence of the marginally more successful Yoshi series, and Shikifumi Hino playing a key role in the breakout success of the new Mario Maker games, it's possible not many leadership figures were left to make Pikmin a priority. What I think is most likely is that Pikmin 4 began its development on the Wii U, and when that console's life was cut short, the project shifted to the Switch before losing focus when staff members were pulled to work on other, higher priority projects, leaving Pikmin on the back burner indefinitely. But that may have just changed in 2020. As many of the Wii U's exclusives were being ported to the Switch to fill out the release calendar, a port of Pikmin 3 was never quite out of the question. But with the controls and core features designed to take full advantage of the Wii U's unique offerings, it wasn't as clear how Nintendo would approach it. This may have caused Pikmin 3 Deluxe to be one of the last Wii U games to reach the new platform. But it's all the better for it, because in addition to a bunch of new quality of life features, the extra side story content, co-op capabilities, all the previously released DLC, and even the widely requested return of the Piccolopedia makes it much easier to recommend as the definitive version of Pikmin 3, especially for newcomers. Most importantly, however, were those controls, because with the Switch being the first platform to move back to a style of more traditional controls since the release of the very first Pikmin game, I not only wondered how they could be adapted, I was also quite skeptical. After growing accustomed to the precision and reliability of the Wii Remote, I didn't think I could ever go back. Thankfully, I didn't exactly have to. The real strength of this port is in its sheer amount of different control options, offering a whole lot more customization than what has become the frankly poor standard for Nintendo. Predictably, I wasn't as huge a fan of the default control scheme, simultaneously manipulating the cursor and character with a single analog stick. While the updated and much more fluid lock-on functionality accounted well for the lack of independent aim, it really trivialized the action of throwing. And I missed the satisfaction of snapping between enemies and targeting specific weak points with my own skill, not the additional press of a button. Being able to customize the control shored up that weakness, because while I still ultimately prefer the Wii Remote's pointer, I am tremendously thankful that gyro control has since become a standard feature of Nintendo's controllers, as it is the next best option. It's definitely not perfect, as one of the gyroscope's innate limitations is its tendency to drift and need to be recalibrated. But in practicality, having to occasionally press another button to realign the cursor is a small price to pay for having more options overall and even more control over the camera, which brings up a pretty interesting point. Unlike my previous work on Star Fox, this Pikmin story is currently ongoing, because at the end of 2022, something amazing happened. Since the release of Pikmin 3 Deluxe, in the meantime, a Pikmin mobile game developed in partnership with Niantic to emulate the style of the global cultural phenomenon Pokemon Go was released. And it was the topic of discussion during Nintendo's latest Direct presentation. For as huge a Pikmin fan as I am, I was never particularly interested in Pikmin Bloom or Pokemon Go. Call me crazy, but I personally enjoy taking walks enough on their own that the desire to gamify them doesn't often cross my mind. But in this particular situation, my eyes were glued to the screen because I couldn't help but feel like something was off about having Miyamoto go into an exorbitant amount of detail discussing an already released mobile game. And sure enough, there it was. As if an homage to the long road to Pikmin 3 after its GameCube predecessor, after nearly a decade of waiting, after hope for a brand new Pikmin game for the Switch had been reduced to little more than a thread, Pikmin 4 was finally unveiled, albeit in limited capacity. Most notably, Miyamoto revealed that in the shift to the Switch, Pikmin's controls became simpler to better allow players to focus on the core essence of Pikmin gameplay, and even open up the game to being played from a tighter perspective. Many of my own questions regarding this shift were answered in the subsequent full reveal trailer, showing instances of play from a multitude of perspectives. More so than changing my mind on the original version of Pikmin 3, revisiting its Deluxe re-release instilled in me a newfound confidence in what can be achieved with this next rapidly approaching entry. Just as each past entry has before it, it appears as though Pikmin 4 will be utilizing the Switch's new features to explore Pikmin from an entirely new angle. Many angles, in fact, with the embrace of full camera control. And if gyro cursor control is preserved, I think we could all be in for an equally enriching and wonderful experience to finally push the series forward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Instead of continuing to speculate as we've reached the end of this chapter, I think I want to save the rest of my thoughts for myself and fully immerse myself in what is just around the corner. Because in spite of everything, the story of Pikmin is not yet over. Occasionally, I'm asked why I've decided to dedicate months of my life to these deep dives into somewhat overlooked Nintendo franchises, and believe me, I ask myself that same question fairly often. Part of what motivates me is the fact that the records are just fascinating, as there isn't quite another company in the video game industry with such a rich history. A history that has been a huge part of my life since I was young enough to play the games without being able to read a word on the screen. But the real big reason is because I live for a good underdog story. I believe in these games, and I want other people to see what I see in them. When I first began this project, I looked upon Pikmin with a jaded sense of sympathy. I felt it was dealt a uniquely poor set of circumstances that would have caused any of Nintendo's iconic properties to be overlooked. Not only was it first released on a struggling platform, its main releases have only ever debuted on struggling platforms until now. I believe that through no fault of its own, Pikmin's fans were fated to continue waiting decades between series entries, not because the games weren't good enough, but because most people failed to understand how special they are. And I wanted to try to change that, but now I think I feel a little differently. Pikmin's history is very much still an underdog story, but rather than looking upon it with pity, I feel pride. Pikmin didn't become the next Mario, but it did challenge and explore what Nintendo's games could become, offered a play experience one could not find anywhere else, and touched me as a player in a way I wasn't yet able to understand. Pikmin 2 didn't win over enough of its critics to catapult it into the mainstream, but it spared no expense to become a well of creativity, going to some strange places to capture the hearts of some of the series' most dedicated fans. Pikmin 3 was unable to save its platform doomed to fail, but it did recapture my attention, helping me fall back in love with gaming just as I had when I first witnessed Captain Olimar and his elite platoon. What surprised me in my research was the fact that Pikmin became a franchise not out of desperation, but passion and confidence. We didn't make Pikmin 3 simply to extend the series. We made it because we wanted to. It's a quote I often think about with respect to the state of the series. It's entirely possible it will never outgrow its current reputation. Not because it was dealt a poor hand, but because it's just a niche idea, and that's okay. Because in spite of that, the series has endured for 20 years, and Pikmin is all about endurance. It's about asking tough questions about life and overcoming poor odds. Even in some of the darkest hours, life often finds a way to persevere. And sometimes it doesn't. I think knowing that makes moments like these a bit sweeter. One of the most formative moments of my first Pikmin experience comes shortly after touching down in the Forest of Hope for the first time. There is an instant sense of wonder as an early morning fog shrouds the immediate surroundings, slightly obfuscating the true scale of the world. The landing site feels like an extension of the previous impact site. There's no danger to be found, and with just a handful of objects to interact with, players eventually find themselves interacting with a gate for the first time. Over 20 years later, I often take these gates as the purpose they were designed to serve. They're an obstacle that can only be circumvented with time and resources. And as such, I rarely spend my time waiting for the Pikmin to dismantle them. Instead, supervising other tasks in the meantime. But not with this gate. This is truly the calm before the storm. The final moment of the game where the player simply has to wait. It's a vibe check and beautiful moment where all you can really do is take a deep breath and envelop yourself in the melody of its accompanying tracks, bright keys, and soothing strings. This song, true to its namesake, unearths with it a sense of hope. It's for this reason that this particular gate evokes a deep retrieval of memories from my playthrough over 20 years ago. When I was a child, the destruction of this wall felt like hours passing me by, and all I could think about was what lay beyond. My sense of wonder still intact. Today, and on each subsequent playthrough, this gate has taken on new meaning. As I zoom the camera in to more closely observe these strange, minuscule creatures while I still can, working together with unwavering determination to take down this comparatively colossal structure. A countdown towards the inevitable rush of beginning another race through a sprawling, unforgiving, and foreign landscape begins. Can I do it faster this time? Can I preserve the lives of even more Pikmin? 3, 2, 1, go. To me, that's the magic of Pikmin. "29 days since impact. I'll be honest, I think Pikmin 4 looks amazing. And it could just be the game that accelerates the growth of Pikmin's popularity, but even if it doesn't, I think Pikmin will be okay. Because I have the hope that Pikmin will continue to endure, just as the intrepid Olimar has for his 4th journey. Or has he? Again, I'm getting ahead of myself. At least, that's a story for another day. Hey guys, it's Wiz. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for watching the video if you've made it up to this point, and I want to give a very special thank you to my Patreon supporters, including Julian Messmer, Questing Refuge, and Blacktooth Bob. So clearly it's been a minute since my last upload, and that's obviously because I've been working on this monstrous video since April. I've been researching, writing, and putting it all together ever since then. What I found when I started writing this video is I just had so much to say about Pikmin, especially having grown up with it as a child, and my ultimate goal is to make the Pikmin fans proud. So while this video was 2.5 hours, I found that I could have easily found even more things to talk about. So if there's anything you think I missed, let's talk about it in the comments. Part of my dream for this channel is to be able to continue telling stories like these, especially about Nintendo, to the best of my ability. And what I found, especially working on this project, was that there's a lot of information out there that has yet to be translated and brought over to the West. In the future, I'd like to be able to help fund translation efforts, especially in the name of preservation, as well as working on my own projects. And so if you believe in that goal as well, and you want to see the best videos that I can make, please consider supporting my Patreon page. It's the best way to support these videos. Seriously, in order to be able to spend 3 to 6 months working on such projects, it really helps to be able to have that Patreon support at my back. And also to get it out of the way, because I know people are going to be asking, Wiz, are you going to make a Pikmin 4 video? Obviously the answer is yes, and I hope to be back with that very, very soon.